the Imperial Era from scratch. This video is purely for entertainment and does not infringe on copyrights or laws. The rights to the novel and image belong to the original author. We do not claim ownership. Don't like waiting and want to listen to this fanfic in full now? Subscribe to our Patreon, where you'll find the best fanfics. Chapter 326, Heading to the Marvel Universe. David looked at Clark, who had come before him with Tony. He was curious about how Tony had persuaded this honest Kryptonian farmer. Was it by deception? By a surprise attack? Tony said he could help me find clues to my identity. Clark's explanation finally made David understand Tony's method. Clark wasn't wandering around his own world out of boredom. Even if he was feeling lost, he wouldn't just wander around constantly. Finding a place to be lost wouldn't be a bad idea, so why wander around? He was mainly hoping to find some clues. While the hope was slim, it wasn't completely hopeless. Clark's actions weren't completely illogical. After learning from his adoptive father that he wasn't from Earth and receiving a small plug-in, he wanted to see if he could find something similar elsewhere. Since his biological parents had landed their escape pod on this planet, they must have explored and known about it before making this decision. This also meant that Earth had already been explored by his own people, and perhaps there were other things on Earth related to his homeworld. With this in mind, Clark found the Kryptonian research vessel and activated his own plug-in through the ship's facilities. Tony might not have known about these plot points, but he suggested that since Clark had such a device, he could use some methods to search, detect, and compare similar energy fluctuations such as radiation to find possible clues. This would be much more reliable than Clark's random search. Tony also reminded Clark to make good use of his unique advantages. Winter City is full of talented people and means. Many problems can be easily solved by simply asking for help. There is no need to struggle alone. Moreover, with Clark's abilities, people would need his help many times, so there was no need to be embarrassed to ask for help. Thus, Clark was brought to Glamorgan Castle by Tony without any hesitation and became a member of Tony's space adventure team. If you're not available, I'll go with Clark. Seeing Tony's expression, which seemed to suggest he'd found a more suitable teammate, David was speechless. He simply instructed Tony to take Clark through some preparations, like getting him the necessary equipment, while he went to greet a few people. I know, say hello to your close friends. Tony also had to greet Pepper Potts and, at most, tell his good friend Rhoda that he'd be away for a while. Unlike David, he had to greet multiple people and might even face questioning. While that scene might be amusing, Tony felt it was best not to interfere too much with the Duke of Glamorgan's private life. Giving his lord some face would make his life more comfortable in Winterfell. After Tony and Clark left, David first said hello to Eva. I'm going to Tony's place to do something. Do you want to come? Going to work? Yes, then I won't go with you to cause trouble. Eva knew her limitations. Although she had mastered the holy light and acquired many of the priest's light-wielding skills, she was still not a true warrior. Even if she persisted in improving herself in the dungeon, she still lacked a warrior's heart. It would be fine if she were just out having fun, but if she were to handle something, she felt like a drag. She preferred it now, staying at the base camp to process various documents and information. Okay then, David confirmed the locations of the other people from Eva. After asking around, only Laura, who loved to go out and cause trouble, decided to go along. Helen and Gwen, though equally skilled, shared Eva's sentiment, no need to cause trouble. However, Gwen hinted that next time, if she wasn't on business, she'd like to go with David to Tony Stark's universe for a good look. As for Sophia, he and the princess got along well, but they hadn't reached that stage yet. So David simply told Sophia he was going away for a while, keeping her in the dark. However, this clever little princess must have known something and would likely ask Eva, Helen, and others about it later. David knew about this situation, but he never emphasized the need for Sophia to keep it a secret with Eva and the others, indirectly allowing Sophia to glean some of the real secrets. He then greeted Ceremonial Officer Elias, Administrative Officer Weatherby Swan, Sheriff Elizabeth Swan, Grand Master of the Winter Knights Gareth Stanton, Deputy Grand Master Floyd, and Megatron and Optimus Prime of the Cybertron Legion. They didn't see the Duke's departure as a big deal. With the various plans for Winter City underway and everything on track, whether the Lord stayed within his domain wasn't particularly important. Even if an emergency arose, David could be contacted through Steve. Oh, right, tell Confusion and Little Brain to get ready. They're going with me this time. Little Brain and Confusion will report in immediately. Megatron had already returned to Winterfell from Snow Forest. The cleanup of the northern plains was essentially complete. Now all that was needed was regular aerial reconnaissance to ensure the orcs hadn't returned. As for building a new city at the eastern harbor of the northern plains, that could be discussed first. Once David returned from the Marvel Universe, his staff should have come up with some general ideas, and we could then decide on the approach. Also, Winterfell's population has finally reached the size of a city, so it's time to further improve its administrative structure. David summoned several key officials, essentially assigning new tasks before his departure. During this time, everyone should work together to figure out how to build a new administrative system. This task didn't have to be solely Weatherby's. Elizabeth, Weatherby, Eva, Artis, and even Gina, Peggy Carter, and others could consult. You could also ask Earl Sutton Stewart, Marcus Priorato, and others. The combined knowledge and experience of so many would surely be more suitable for Winterfell than simply applying a template. What if David wasn't satisfied with the final plan? He was the absolute ruler of Winterfell, so he could make any changes he pleased. With everything arranged, David began packing his luggage, surrounded by the women. Helen, Gwen, Sophia, and Eva, supposedly helping with the packing, were actually just chatting and watching, occasionally interjecting, "Aren't you taking that armor?" "No, Marvel Universe." He was about to say that there seemed to be very few opportunities to wear armor in the Marvel Universe, but then he remembered that Thor often wore armor, or rather, that many people in Asgard did. Might as well take it. He packed his Lightbringer suit and checked his weapons: Aquaman's lance, Hammer of Judgment, Light Hunter, and bullets. It's been a while since I've used it, but I still pack my bow and arrows out of habit. After packing some daily necessities, along with a Rubik's Cube and Mind Stone he'd previously put into his storage bracelet, David realized he still had a lot of unused space. Even if he left room for any goodies he might find, there was still too much left. Right, Laura was doing something similar. After taking inventory, she suddenly remembered something: we're going into space this time, right? Why should I bring a set of Blizzard power armor? David didn't have Cybertron transformations to worry about, but he didn't have the ability to survive in space. At best, he could rely on the protection of the Holy Light for a while. To be on the safe side, it would be best to bring a set of clothing that would ensure her survival in space. Speaking of which, David called Tony via the communicator, asking if he had prepared spacesuits for them. He felt that the Blizzard power armor currently used by Winterfell was still a little lacking. "Of course I've considered this, so you don't have to worry about it. Speaking of which, who's coming with you?" Tony certainly didn't overlook David's transformation abilities. David's sudden question was clearly a question for the others. "Laura, only her." "Yes, my ship has plenty of space. Are those around you really not considering coming along?" Despite Tony's sincere invitation, Helen, Eva, and Gwen declined. Sophia, with a docile expression, pretended not to understand. Seeing everyone still agreed, David didn't ask again. After packing with Laura, he and Tony arranged to meet at the north gate of Castle Glamorgan. Tony Stark, Clark Kent, Lara Croft, and the too many cons, Chaos and Brainy. Including David, everyone was traveling light. After all, no one knew how much was in their storage bracelets. David glanced at Clark. The Kryptonian was curiously examining his bracelet, and a look of embarrassment crossed his face when he sensed David's gaze. "I've never seen such an amazing thing before. A few years ago, I hadn't seen anything like this either." David smiled and signaled Clark not to be embarrassed, as everyone was in a similar situation. "In addition to giving you a storage bracelet, what else did Tony prepare for you?" "Some basic survival supplies." "Oh?" David turned his head to look at Tony, as if he knew what he was going to ask. Tony answered directly, "Most of the things are over there, including power armor that can survive and move in the universe. I'll give it to you after we get over there." "Then what are you waiting for? Let's go." Chapter 327, Luxury Edition Blizzard Armor. Avengers Tower remained, having become a vital base for the Avengers' activities. Besides housing all the necessary equipment for the Avengers, Tony Stark also stored a large amount of resources for research and manufacturing. But being in the heart of the city isn't ideal. "I'm considering moving the base to the suburbs and building a new Avengers base there." Tony had already purchased the land, finalized the plans, and begun preliminary construction. It wouldn't be long before the new base was officially operational. "If you can lend me the diggers, the new base could be built even faster." If you don't mind delaying the construction of the industrial zone, we can discuss it." Upon hearing David's response, Tony abandoned the idea without hesitation. "Forget it, Avengers Tower can still hold up for a while, and there's no rush for us to move to a new home." As several people were talking in the lounge, a circle of light suddenly appeared nearby. Tony was accustomed to such scenes and wasn't surprised at all. Clark, however, was startled and took a step back, his face wary. "Don't worry, it must be Steve." David's guess was correct. The visitor was indeed the current Sorcerer Supreme, Steve Rogers. This teleportation spell, where you can just draw a circle and go wherever you want, is a signature spell of Camartage. Unfortunately, it doesn't work on the continent of Brunia, only in the Marvel Universe. "Why did you suddenly find time to come to my place?" Steve had just finished speaking when he noticed Tony staring at him with disapproval. Here, Tony wanted to explore the universe, and since I didn't have anything important to do back home, I decided to go with him. Space travel, roaming the universe, it's something many people dream of. David had also fantasized about becoming an explorer or space adventurer, adventuring across the boundless cosmos. "I see. By the way, how did you know I was coming?" David was curious about how Steve knew exactly where he was coming from. It seemed Tony hadn't even had time to greet the other Avengers yet. Ahem. Steve looked embarrassed, as if he was trying to come up with some impromptu lie to get by. Before he could finish, David had already guessed the truth. "Isn't Camartage monitoring me?" "Actually, I only found out about that after I took over as Sorcerer Supreme." Steve immediately blamed the incident on the previous Sorcerer Supreme, the Ancient One. He definitely hadn't been the one monitoring David. "That's not surprising." David waved his hand, indicating that he didn't mind such a small matter. After all, Camartage was now considered one of their own, in some ways, with the spread of the holy light throughout Camartage. His status within Camartage was comparable to that of Ashanti. Speaking of which, the Ancient One is already, she's gone. The Ancient One had left in front of the many mages of Camartage, her entire body transformed into tiny dots of magical light, leaving no trace behind. Most of the mages in Camartage believed the Ancient One had reached the end of her lifespan, and, before her death, had found a new path for the mages of Camartage. She was undoubtedly an excellent Sorcerer Supreme. Steve, however, knew that the Ancient One actually no longer wanted to be the Sorcerer Supreme. It wasn't that her lifespan had completely ended, but that she was going to report to her new boss. David, of course, knew this. So he never considered tricking the Ancient One into coming to Winterfell. "That's right, I just came by to say hello. I have a lot of things to tend to, so I'll be back first. You go ahead." Steve had truly just come by to say hello. His unexpected trip to Winterfell and meeting David had profoundly changed his life. With David's arrival in his world, he couldn't possibly avoid even a few words, even if he was busy. However, he felt the burden on his shoulders was too much, and he had already begun training his successors. Wanda Maximoff and Stephen Strange were both on his list of successors. Wanda had become his student, currently studying the fundamentals of magic at Camartage. He also planned to send her to Winterfell to learn the light soon. Stephen Strange, it wouldn't be long before he showed up. After Steve left, Tony said hello to Clint and Natasha, informing them of David's arrival. He didn't hide anything from them just because they were SHIELD agents. After fighting together several times, the Avengers had built a trusting relationship, and he trusted them to know what was and wasn't to be shared. For example, Steve had been inside Hydra for so long, and the two people who knew the inside story hadn't leaked it, leaving SHIELD, the ones who eliminated Hydra, still unaware of Steve's situation. "Before we leave, let's take a look at the spacesuits prepared for you." Taking the elevator to the suit-making workshop, David, Laura, and Clark quickly saw the suits Tony had prepared for them. The armor's appearance is roughly similar to the Blizzard Power Armor, but it utilizes superior technology and materials, and incorporates several new features. With the addition of vibranium and mithril, as well as some Hellor and light cast iron, even this outer shell is a very good armor. David wanted to rant. Hellor from dungeons, and light cast iron? Would mixing these two things explode? Thanks to the mithril and light cast iron, this armor has excellent energy conductivity, especially holy light. The shock absorption system is comparable to his own steel armor, and the energy shield is more advanced and powerful than the one used by the Blizzard Power Armor. It also has an integrated potion injection device. In addition to healing potions, it also has mana potions, which are essentially pure energy that replenishes the caster's mana. These mana potions can be replaced with pure arcane energy potions, which are more effective for arcane energy users, but not as versatile as the standard mana potions. There are also stamina potions, which can restore a large amount of stamina depleted by the user. Antidote potions can remove and neutralize most toxins. These potions were obtained from the dungeon and then crafted after research. Apothecary Cordell, recommended to David by Lord Sutton Stewart, made significant contributions to these efforts, and David felt he should reward this dedicated pharmacist. In addition to potions for various situations, this suit of armor features multiple posture adjustment nozzles, ensuring that everyone can freely control their posture in space. The back thrusters have also been enhanced, enabling high-speed flight. Even if the spacecraft explodes, they can fly to a nearby planet and land with just this suit of armor. This suit of armor ensures that the user can land smoothly from space to the planet's surface. The internal life support system is fully stocked with oxygen, clean water, and nutritious liquid food. It also has a cleaning function. Even if you don't remove the suit for a month, you'll still stay clean and smell good. The various resources needed for survival are stored in a dedicated storage space, which can hold more than enough. The cleaning function probably uses technology similar to the cleansing orb, which should be considered enchanted equipment, right? Is this new suit a combination of science and magic? But on closer inspection, the Blizzard Power Armor, with its spatial storage technology, is itself a combination of science and magic. Furthermore, to prevent possible wear and tear, the suit is equipped with a nanobox inside, which stores sufficient nanomaterials to repair the suit in the event of damage. Hearing this, David felt that this thing was already perfect. Compared to the Blizzard Power Armor, this suit was a significant upgrade. As for the weapon system, the Blizzard Power Armor's weapon system was not surprising. Since the suit's current purpose was to support life in space, he didn't think Tony would do anything shady with the weaponry. He was wrong. Tony, with his free time, was far more bored than David could have imagined. This deluxe version of the Blizzard Power Armor boasted the same features as the Blizzard Power Armor, including missile launchers mounted on its shoulders and concealed flash grenades, smoke grenades, and other tactical weapons on its forearms. It also featured an energy release mechanism. When surrounded by a large group of enemies, it could unleash a powerful energy shockwave, sending any approaching enemies flying and ensuring a completely safe space. It also had various other functions, including energy shockwave, electromagnetic pulse, and counter-electromagnetic pulse. Is this a spacesuit? Clark, who had been listening quietly and silently, was now filled with questions. Was this actually individual space combat equipment? Yes, it is a spacesuit, Tony nodded affirmatively. After all, no one knows what we might encounter in space. I need to be fully prepared. Clark, convinced by Tony's words, felt a certain logic in his words and stopped questioning whether this was a spacesuit or a weapon. Tony then pointed to a few unpainted spacesuits and inquired about their preferences. We still have some time, so you can choose your own color scheme for your spacesuit. We can take advantage of this time to check out the spacecraft. It was also a good time to check if there was anything else to bring. Don't wait until you're leaving Earth to remember you forgot something. Chapter 328, The First Step of Space Adventure. Considering the space environment, Laura and Clark both opted for a pure white color scheme, which would make them conspicuous in the cosmos. As for David, while he possessed Cybertron transformation in a biofield, allowing him to survive in space, he still had a few hidden cards to play with. David liked to have a bunch of them handy before going out. It gave him a sense of security. He had originally wanted to keep his spacesuit pure black, but Laura overruled him and chose a white one for him, too, but with a gray-black wolf head design on the shoulder. Later, David requested a red wolf head be spray painted on the shoulder of Laura's spacesuit. Clark glanced at the two and whispered to Tony beside him, "Should I get a wolf head spray painted on my spacesuit too? Anything else would be fine, like a design that might be related to your identity." "Sounds good, let's do it." As for Tony, he had his own suit and didn't need this spacesuit. The various features integrated into his suit were definitely more powerful than these normal spacesuits. After deciding on the paint color, the group reached the rooftop of Avengers Tower. The inhabitants of this world would never have guessed that Avengers Tower harbored a spaceship, its technological sophistication far surpassing Earth's current capabilities. In terms of appearance, perhaps to facilitate access to and from the planet, the ship resembled an airplane, similar overall to the Quinjet used by Winterfell and the Avengers. However, this ship was larger and more substantial, resulting in a more spacious interior. Combined with spatial storage technology and Cybertronian compression technology, this freed up a significant amount of space for resource storage, making the interior quite comfortable. At least everyone had their own room. Furthermore, a dining room, bathroom, and other amenities were all available. Tony Stark wasn't about to endure hardships just to travel the cosmos in search of advanced technology, so he made meticulous preparations. In fact, if time wasn't a factor, he would have built a larger ship for even greater comfort. I guess there's nothing I've forgotten. After ensuring they were well prepared and no one wanted to add anything else, Tony had Jarvis load the spacesuits, now repainted white, onto the ship. What's the name of this ship, Enterprise? David looked at the ship and thought the name didn't fit. Your new ship isn't round at all. Is this a good name? It's just a temporary product that's being used excessively, so just give it a random name. Enterprise has a nice meaning, yeah, that's lucky. After the name was decided and the supplies were loaded, Tony went over some things with Pepper Potts, Happy, and the others. Pepper Potts was helpless and couldn't dissuade Tony from his sudden decision to go into space. She could only say that while she was in charge of Stark Enterprise, he shouldn't forget that it was a Stark family company. He shouldn't have too much fun and forget to come back. Don't worry, I'm doing this for the better development of Stark Enterprise. Pepper simply listened to this advice and chatted with David and Laura for a while, hoping David would keep an eye on Tony and prevent him from doing anything outrageous. David felt a great deal of pressure, as Laura often did. I'll do my best. Meanwhile, Natasha and Clint chatted with David. Both were usually busy, after all, active agents. And not particularly close to David. They were both so busy that they took the time to say hello, which was a great favor. After finishing their chores, they finally boarded the Enterprise, which was ready for departure. Jarvis, deploy the upper deck. The Enterprise was quite large, so to fly out, they had to open the entire upper deck and then deploy the wings, which had been retracted. Sir, I strongly suggest you activate the Enterprise's cloaking system first. It's okay. This is Avengers Tower, and we're used to all sorts of weird stuff. David, sitting in the co-pilot's seat, suddenly thought, Jarvis's signal can't travel very far, right? The Enterprise has a small server farm that should be sufficient. If Tony was willing to invest the time, he could easily install a full server farm on the Enterprise, making Jarvis the Enterprise's artificial intelligence system. But as he said, the Enterprise was just an overused ship, so the effort wasn't necessary. And as Tony gained more advanced knowledge, he might be able to shrink Jarvis's hardware even further, making it portable. As the two spoke, the roof of Avengers Tower unfolded completely into the open air, and the Enterprise extended its folded wings. Engine start. There might be some turbulence, but that's normal, so don't panic. The sound of the engine starting up, coupled with Tony's endless explanation, silenced everyone's nerves. As the Enterprise soared high into the sky, piercing the atmosphere and embracing the vastness of space, everyone's attention was drawn to the view outside the window. Activating simulated gravity, gravity system operating normally. With Jarvis's voice, the brief moment of weightlessness vanished, and it felt as if they were still on Earth. What do you think? Should we take a flight around the sun? Tony, checking the ship's data and conducting various flight tests, suddenly glanced at David in the co-pilot seat and then at Clark in the back. Clark, who saw it all clearly, said, "Don't worry, there are plenty of yellow stars in the universe." David gazed at the pitch-black space and suddenly remembered something. Speaking of which, does your ship have the ability to jump? Of course, the most reliable way to travel across the universe is to use space jumps. Otherwise, even leaving the solar system would take a considerable amount of time, let alone traversing the galaxy. All cosmic civilizations in the Marvel Universe possess space jump capabilities, which are categorized as either using existing wormholes or creating a wormhole temporarily. The vast majority of ships use the former. For example, in the Guardians of the Galaxy, Star-Lord and his crew need to fly to specific locations to jump, using existing wormholes to travel long distances. The Bifrost, on the other hand, creates a temporary wormhole, allowing for space transfer at any time. David thought of this because space jump technology doesn't exist on Earth, and it seems Tony won't have the opportunity to master it. Could it have been acquired through Thor? Thor was just checking it out for me. As Tony explained, David finally understood that the technical requirements for utilizing existing wormholes weren't high. For Tony, already versed in Cybertronian technology, building a reliable jump drive was a simple matter. Cybertron's expertise in space technology was impressive, allowing Tony to easily locate wormholes and use them for long-distance jumps. I have another question. What? You can find the wormhole, but do you know where it's on the other side? Due to the lack of universal star maps and other data about the universe, David and his team could use wormholes for long-distance travel, but where they would jump to was completely unknown. That kind of unknown journey is the real risk. David rolled his eyes, not really seeing anything wrong with it. After all, they could all travel to Winterfell at any time, without having to worry about dying in the vast universe. Only Clark, who didn't fully understand the situation, felt a little panicked. He suddenly felt that this guy named Tony Stark wasn't very trustworthy. He felt like he'd boarded a pirate ship. Was it too late to get off now? Hold on tight, say goodbye to the solar system, hopefully not to the Milky Way. The ship accelerated, the jump engines activated, and a hexagonal grid appeared in front of it. At its center was the wormhole locked and opened by the jump engines. As the Enterprise plunged through, the surroundings remained unchanged. It was still the inky blackness of space. The nearest planets were mere dots, their shapes indistinct. Where are we? I don't know, but I do know we're quite a distance from Earth. Tony raised his head and gestured for David to look at the screen in front of him. A section of the image in the front window zoomed in, and everyone, including Lauren and Clark in the back seat, saw a strange planet that looked like several connected spheres. There's definitely no planet with such a strange shape near our solar system. David, upon seeing this unique shape, immediately recalled the corresponding memories and images. He knew exactly where they had arrived. His reaction was so obvious that everyone noticed. Tony asked David directly, "Do you recognize this place?" Yes, David was certain of his judgment. After all, the planet's shape was so unique. That planet is sovereign, Svarin? Are there intelligent civilizations there? Of course, and quite advanced. The smaller spheres connected to the largest planet in the center were actually technological artifacts, which is why Sovereign has such a strange appearance. However, the Sovereigns are not easy to deal with. If you want to obtain advanced technology, Sovereign is not a good choice, no matter. Tony shrugged. You are the one who has to deal with them. After all, only you can communicate smoothly with aliens. Chapter 329 Sovereign. David hadn't expected this. Perhaps Tony had been urging him to come to space with him because he was impressed by his ability to speak a variety of languages? That made sense. After all, Tony hadn't learned the languages of every race in the universe, nor did he have access to the translators currently used by civilizations. Naturally, he'd need a super translator. Very thoughtful indeed. Tony had considered everything necessary, and David couldn't find any faults. But the Sovereigns. Just as David was debating whether to attempt contact with these little golden men or have Tony search for a jump point to explore the next location, several space fighters launched from Sovereign and quickly landed in front of the Enterprise. These fighters were distinctively designed, with a massive screen on the front displaying the pilot's influence. What is this? The Sovereigns hold themselves in high regard, believing the lives of their own people are of paramount importance. That's why their fighters are all remotely controlled. After hearing David's explanation, Tony had a relatively clear impression of this cosmic race called the Sovereigns. It seems the Sovereigns are quite difficult to deal with. However, it is precisely because of this sovereign character that we have the opportunity to truly interact with cosmic civilization. David's public channel was already carrying a sovereign ultimatum, warning them to declare their intentions as soon as possible, or the sovereign fighter formation would immediately open fire. In a few words, David had mastered the sovereign language and was speaking to the opposing fighter formation over the public channel. We're a newly formed mercenary group. We heard there's a lot of work available on Sovereign, so we came to check it out. While replying to the sovereign fighter formation, David also explained his intentions to the people around him. The Sovereigns hold themselves very high, avoiding danger whenever possible. Therefore, any dangerous work on Sovereigns tends to be handled by outsiders. Plus, the Sovereigns pay quickly and efficiently, making them a good employer. So, you want to take on some work with the Sovereigns? Yes, to earn money to buy technology. Tony and his friends came from Earth, which had virtually no connection to cosmic civilization. Even if he were wealthy on Earth, he would be penniless in space. Even if he found a way to sell technology, he wouldn't have the funds to buy it. Initially, he wanted to explore and steal as much as he could. If possible, He could collect some cosmic equipment and reverse engineer it. With David's little brain and the Decepticons, he had come with the idea of a no-cost business from the start. The Sovereign won't share their advanced technology. Advanced civilizations in the universe are very strict about their cutting-edge technologies. Low-level technology doesn't need to be purchased. You can find a wealth of publicly available technical information by connecting to the cosmic network. But we need some basic equipment, like a translation device that will allow you to communicate normally with various races in the universe. This device, about the size of a fingernail, can be attached to any part of the head, such as behind the ear, or implanted directly into the body. Star-Lord has a translation device implanted in the setting. Once worn, it allows one to understand most major languages in the universe, facilitating normal communication between races. And there's also a universal star map, especially the jump points marked on it. With this information, one can choose the correct jump point and reach their desired destination, rather than relying solely on luck and flying wherever they land. Just as David was explaining his plan to the others, the Sovereign Fighter Squadron leader had already consulted with their superiors. There was indeed a lot of work to be done on Sovereign, and it carried a certain degree of risk. Given another choice, the Sovereigns would never let their own family handle such tasks. David and his companions' arrival resolved this issue, leading them to a personal audience with Aisha, the High Priestess of the Sovereign. "Are you the one seeking to take on missions in the Sovereign?" The High Priest sat aloft on a massive throne. The Sovereigns deeply revere the color gold, and the entire chair, including its decorations, was adorned with gold. With his golden skin and golden attire, the High Priest seemed to blend seamlessly into the massive golden throne. Those with less discerning eyesight might even suspect the chair was part of the High Priest. However, David's companions possessed exceptional vision and were unlikely to make such a mistake. Meanwhile, High Priestess Aisha, standing opposite them, was also sizing up the seemingly ordinary individuals before her. High Priestess Aisha possessed a keen eye. Although the men and women before her appeared to be identical humans, she discerned their uniqueness, none of them ordinary. This intrigued her, and she was particularly curious about their races. She was particularly unsure of the young man standing in the front, David, who appeared to possess a very noble pedigree. The Sovereigns held themselves in high esteem, looking down on other races. However, they showed considerable respect for those of superior bloodlines. Rather, those of superior bloodlines commanded a higher regard from the Sovereigns. This respect went beyond mere verbal displays of respect, reaching the point of actively expressing favorable impressions. Aisha now had a favorable impression of David. After observing him, her condescending demeanor faded considerably. She stood up from her seat and spoke to David and the others. "While I don't know your origins, Sovereign Planet has indeed accumulated a considerable amount of troublesome work, and I'm willing to employ you to resolve it." High Priestess Aisha stared at David. "As long as you can complete these tasks, your earlier requests will be no problem." Aisha didn't even raise her arm. Her right hand, hanging naturally, simply moved her wrist and pointed at a nearby guard, who retrieved a box. The guard carried the box over to David and the others and opened it. Inside, she found several small props, the translation device David had mentioned earlier, along with universal star map data. Unexpectedly, the Sovereigns had directly gifted several of their most urgently needed items. According to the High Priest, these items weren't even considered deposits, merely welcome gifts. David wasn't surprised. These items weren't much of a thing for a higher civilization, and they were the only ones he and his group, fresh from a remote village on Earth, desperately needed. After distributing the translators among the group and explaining how to use them, David closed the box containing several other translators and star map data and put it away. This casual gesture made High Priestess Aisha's eyes light up. She still couldn't tell what planet this person came from or what race he belonged to, but he seemed quite civilized. At least the Sovereigns hadn't developed such advanced space technology. Could they have come from some distant star system? Now, let's talk about the work. David watched Laura, Tony, and Clark put the translators behind their ears, and then discussed the tasks with High Priestess Aisha. He figured the Sovereigns would start with some simple tasks that could be completed on Sovereign. Would this allow them to keep a close eye on them, while also serving as an assessment? If David and his team performed well, they would be given more missions. David felt they should stay on Sovereign for a while. Unexpectedly, Sovereign High Priestess Aisha defied all convention and directly assigned a challenging pursuit mission. "I want you to capture this man, Without needing the High Priestess's orders, someone used a holographic image to show David and his team the target. David took a quick look and realized the target was someone he knew. What did this person do? She infiltrated Sovereign and attempted to steal the Anger's energy cell. Aisha's face was filled with disdain, as if even looking at the hologram for a moment would irritate her eyes. She stared intently at David the entire time. Although she failed, she must pay the price for offending Sovereign. Therefore, I demand that you capture this thief and bring her back to Sovereign to face her due punishment. Aisha raised her finger again, and her men immediately switched off the hologram. They then handed the small device to David. It contains all the information and leads on this individual. If we find any new leads, we'll notify you. The rest was self-explanatory. All David and his men had to do was follow the intelligence to their target's location and capture him. In reality, with Sovereign's ability to easily locate a target, they were fully capable of arresting them themselves. But as David had explained to Tony earlier, the Sovereigns wouldn't risk their own people if they had a choice. For combat, they could just hire mercenaries. It didn't matter how many died, they only had to pay a reward for their success. Sovereigns were wealthy, anyway. Watching David put away the intelligence and prepare to leave, Aisha couldn't help but ask, "May I ask, David, where are you from?" Brenia, David gestured with his fingers. "A very remote, inconspicuous place, really." Aisha didn't press the issue, simply saying, "I hope you can describe this little place called Brenia to me in detail when you return from your mission." David paused for a second, then bowed slightly before leaving the hall. It was just flirting, he was used to it. Chapter 330 Target Nebula. Climbing aboard the Enterprise, David noticed several people staring at him. "What's going on? I think there's an easier way to obtain Sovereign technology," Tony said as he powered up the spaceship, looking at David in the co-pilot seat. "If Laura doesn't mind." "Oh, I don't mind at all," Laura said, spreading her hands. She simply found this amusement amusing. Clark, standing beside him, had an air of "I know nothing, I'm just watching." He glanced between David and Laura, then fiddled with the translation device attached to his ear. Laura was also studying it. They both realized it contained a wealth of language knowledge and wondered if they could access it and learn it. Despite having such a convenient tool, Laura still had a habit of wanting to master various languages herself, while Clark was simply curious. "Enough kidding, little brain, how's your harvest?" David turned to look at Little Brain. Ever since the Enterprise docked on Sovereign, Little Brain had been attempting to connect to Sovereign's public network, searching for useful information, primarily publicly available technical data. Upon hearing Tony's question, Little Brain, in its notebook form, transformed into humanoid form, a puff of white smoke billowing from its head. "I've downloaded all the tech-related information. Good job, Little Brain." David was never shy about compliments, it was just a casual remark, and Little Brain had done a truly excellent job. David reasoned that even if communication with Sovereign wasn't smooth, as long as he could find a suitable excuse to stay on Sovereign for a while, allowing Little Brain to download sufficient information from the public network, the trip would be worthwhile. Furthermore, they had already received some additional rewards. Considering the cooperation agreement they had reached with Sovereign, David wasn't prepared to let Chaos attempt to breach Sovereign's firewall and steal more advanced technical data. Even without a deal with the High Priestess of Sovereign, he wouldn't have chosen Sovereign if he wanted to steal technical data. He'd more likely have chosen Xander, given its relative civilization and reason. Barring any unforeseen circumstances, Xander would have been annihilated by Thanos and his men within a few years, effectively eliminating any future threat. This was difficult to change, as Star-Lord's Guardians of the Galaxy had already handed the Tesseract, containing the Power Stone, to Xander for safekeeping. He didn't see any information about the Guardians of the Galaxy, but rather, when High Priestess Aisha provided him with the target information, he understood the current timeline. Between Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 1 and Volume 2, High Priestess Aisha instructed David and his men to capture Nebula, one of Thanos' adopted daughters and Gamora's sister. David also recalled the opening scene of Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, where Star-Lord and his companions helped the Sovereigns fight off a monster intent on devouring their energy cells. Their reward is Nebula, who has been captured by the Sovereigns. So, I captured Nebula and handed her over to the Sovereigns. While thinking this, his movements remained unaffected. He first retrieved the star map data and transferred it to the ship's computer, then retrieved intelligence on Nebula to determine their next destination. The intelligence indicates this woman named Nebula was last seen on Contrasha. With their destination determined, they retrieved a star map to locate Contrasha and then determined which jump points would be needed to reach Contrasha from Sovereign. With a detailed star map data, this was a simple task. Jarvis immediately provided the answer and mapped out a detailed flight and jump route. Departure, Enterprise, destination Contrasha. The ship's engines revved to propel the Enterprise towards the jump point. Several jumps would be required to reach their target planet. During this time, they could review various information about their target and gain some understanding of the enemy they were about to encounter. The universe's infamous adopted daughter of Thanos, a powerful assassin, extensively transformed, and extremely dangerous. Tony glanced at the information before him, realizing he and his team had taken on a big job. That Sovereign High Priest really thinks highly of us. The High Priest must have sensed our uniqueness, which is why he gave us this job. David didn't emphasize himself, but instead glanced at Clark and Laura. Hey, Tony spread his hands and gestured at himself. What did David mean by those earlier looks? Was he looking down on me? David ignored Tony's antics. How could he not know that among the intelligent beings present, he was the only ordinary one? He simply didn't show his discomfort. When the time comes, let Clark take action. Wait, me. Clark had been quietly watching the fun from the sidelines. Even though he'd been transported to another world, even on an alien adventure, he didn't consider himself anyone important, just a bystander. Why did David sound like he was assigning him such a crucial task, and such a formidable enemy in the universe? Yes, it's a good opportunity for you to train, isn't it necessary? Very necessary. Clark's abilities weren't already formidable, even if he couldn't fly due to his lack of biotic field skills. His strength and resistance were already formidable. Clark could easily stand still and let an ordinary opponent fight for half an hour, then wait until they tired and knock them down with a single punch. It might be inappropriate for me to ask, but why don't you do it yourself? You must be a formidable warrior, right? Clark wasn't about to refuse, he was simply curious why David didn't take action. Me? A warrior? David waved his right hand vigorously. You must have made one mistake. I'm not a warrior. Yes, this guy is actually a holy light priest. Priest. Clark was stunned for a second, then remembered the Holy Light Cathedral in Winter City. You mean the kind of priests in Winter City who wield holy light? Yes, that's the kind. Is that so? Although Clark was not a game fanatic, he had some basic knowledge of holy light priests. In the game world, it was a purely auxiliary profession. He had never imagined that David, the Duke of Winter, would be a priest. This made sense to him. Tony watched for a moment, realizing Clark actually believed him, treating David like a supporting character. He rolled his eyes speechlessly. You really believe that? Isn't David a priest? Don't dwell on that. I'm indeed a holy light priest, but I've learned a few other skills. David looked at Clark. It's okay to tell you some things in advance. Someone else will tell you anyway. Winter City now has many people from various worlds, many of them from the information-rich world. With a character as famous as Superman, there's no telling how many people would come up to him and tell him spoilers. Even if others don't, Leonard and his group will surely be unable to control their mouths. So, rather than waiting for others to spoil the story, it's better to do it yourself. The conversation quickly shifted from Nebula's intelligence to Superman's personal history. David didn't elaborate too much, simply telling Clark that he was a well-known figure in many worlds, and that his personal history was well-known. Clark didn't question David's knowledge, he was simply surprised by his own identity. A survivor of Krypton's destruction, the first naturally born child born there in many years, he was adopted on Earth by the Kents and became the renowned superhero Superman. Kryptonian? Kal-El? Superman. Clark was stunned by the barrage of information, unsure how to react. It took him a moment to recover. He'd known he was an alien, but the part David had told him that shocked him most was the last part. He would become Superman, the superhero who protects Earth. So, he hadn't lived out his father's promise, hiding his powers and living an ordinary life. You'll still live as Clark Kent. Ordinary people on Earth won't know you're Superman. How do I do that? Simple. I wear glasses. Clark looked at Tony, seriously suspecting he was making fun of him again. That's the point. David proved Tony wasn't just talking nonsense. You must develop your abilities. Besides using your bio-force field to fly and protect people or objects, you can also influence people's perception of your appearance through a certain degree of brainwave interference. I can do things like that. Clark looked down at his hands. He had never even considered hypnosis or flight before. He'd assumed he was just strong, sturdy, and had excellent eyesight and hearing. Only then did he realize his potential was greater than he could imagine. Wait, after a series of shocks, Clark suddenly realized something. Becoming a superhero means my world will be full of crises. Superhero stories are incredibly common in North America. Having grown up there, how could Clark not understand the formula? He immediately realized the key. Will I face powerful enemies in the future? Is my world even more dangerous than this one, filled with countless alien civilizations? David didn't answer, but instead patted Clark on the shoulder. All I can say is, good luck. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelis. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 331 Contra Xiexing. Just how dangerous is Clark's world? It's hard to say. After all, it's a world that constantly reboots, and who knows what will happen when it does? Superman might become Supergirl in the blink of an eye. Batman might look completely different in the blink of an eye. Speaking of enemies alone, there's no doubt they're numerous, and all of them incredibly powerful. Let's not even talk about anything else. Your future compatriots might very well come to Earth and try to transform it into New Krypton. What will you do then? Well, after revealing that there weren't just Clark himself but other survivors on Krypton, and directly pointing out the immense threat they posed to Earth, Clark began to feel a sense of urgency about his future. He realized he really needed to quickly acquire sufficient power. If his compatriots arrived on Earth and, as David had said, disregarded Earth's lives and planned to transform it into New Krypton, he'd at least be able to stop them. Should be able to stop them, right? He wasn't entirely confident. Since they were also Kryptonians, did that mean they shared his abilities? David didn't directly state that Clark's potential surpassed all other Kryptonians. Even if the opponent were a professional military expert with mastered combat skills, it would be difficult to defeat Clark. He hoped Clark would have a sense of crisis and quickly develop his combat power. That way, when General Zod invaded Earth, he could go and lend a hand, striving to crush the Kryptonians. Once General Zod's intentions were completely extinguished, he would have a greater chance of incorporating these Kryptonians into Winter City. General Zod was indeed a Kryptonian supremacist, but he also truly wanted to save Krypton and valued his subordinates. If possible, becoming a minority in Winter City would definitely be preferable to outright extinction. As for the Kryptonian population, Zod, having been specifically trained as a military talent, had completely disregarded any means of increasing the population other than through cultivation. He firmly believed that failing to obtain the Cephalon code from Clark would mean the extinction of the Kryptonians. It was clear that the Kryptonian system did have serious flaws, and Clark's biological father was right. Should he take Clark to see Zeus? Clark remained silent as the spaceship sailed, likely contemplating his future. Tony didn't bother interrupting him, instead staring at David. What, you've set your sights on the Kryptonians? Tony's intelligence was undeniable. He'd guessed David's intentions from his actions. After all, it wasn't hard to guess. Are you planning to establish a Kryptonian Knights? I'm not thinking of forming one, but those Kryptonians are truly exceptional. It would be a shame to see them die on Earth. They were all exceptional military talent. Even if they were taken to Wintertown to fuse their bloodlines and cultivate even more exceptional Winterborn, it would be better than having them all die on that Earth. He figured that if he could first subdue General Zod through force, making him realize the impossibility of seizing Earth by force, and then show him that the Kryptonians wouldn't be destroyed even without the Cephalon Codex, he'd probably be willing to give it a try. What if he even established a Kryptonian settlement in Wintertown? Zod's men had a drastically unbalanced gender ratio, and integrating with a local population was essential for population growth. If this fusion is proven to successfully produce offspring, Winter City will soon see a surge of Kryptonian descendants, and Zod will then be forced to fight for these Kryptonians. The only concern is the education of these Kryptonian offspring. They must not be subjected to a Kryptonian education, they must be taught to love winter and dedicate their lives to it. This isn't difficult. David wouldn't allow Zod to interfere in education. After all, education isn't just about imparting knowledge, it's also crucial for cultivating a balanced perspective. Your country has a complex composition, it's not complex. They're all winter. David curled his lips. Human, elf, Cybertronian, as long as they were winter, they would be their only identity. He'd been trying to downplay the issue, but the true impact would only be seen when more people of non-human descent joined. Clark admired David's approach, while Tony, aware of the difficulties involved, was prepared to observe the excitement with the intention of watching the fun unfold. Of course, if David truly couldn't handle it, he'd still be willing to help. He might not have a perfect solution, but he could provide David with sufficient equipment to solve the problem. As for Laura, as an archaeologist, she was something of an expert in this field, and she was equally curious about whether an empire formed from a blend of races and ethnicities could flourish or perish. Well, I've got a new research topic. By then, Clark had also made a decision. He would become Superman, master his abilities as soon as possible, and become sufficiently powerful. David and Tony hadn't deliberately avoided Clark's conversation, and combined with David's previous comments, Clark already knew a great deal. He still had many compatriots, and these were Kryptonian supremacists, so they wouldn't be particularly friendly to Earthlings. But they were his compatriots, and as long as Earth's safety was guaranteed, he hoped they could find a good home. With Krypton destroyed, it was understandable that his compatriots wanted a new home. Fortunately, the Lord of Winterfell, David, Duke of Glamorgan, was willing to take them in. No matter how you look at it, this is a win-win situation. Earthlings will be safe, the Kryptonians have found a new home, Clark has found his compatriots and learned their whereabouts, and David, Duke of Glamorgan's domain, has become even more powerful. To achieve this, all he needs is to convince General Zod. Clark is no child. He knows that to convince General Zod, he must present some hard evidence. He must not only win, but win beautifully, and the other party must obey him. At this moment, Clark's confusion is no longer in doubt. He sees his path clearly and knows what he must do. Although he has only grasped some of the issues, David senses a profound change in Clark's demeanor. He now seems to be able to display even more terrifying power. Things are getting more interesting. Meanwhile, General Zod, in the DC universe, is still searching the universe for the Central Codex, unaware that the fate of his group of Kryptonian survivors has been sealed in a few words by a few people chatting about their adventures in the neighboring universe. After several space jumps, the Kryptonians, having decided on their destination, finally arrived at their target planet, Contrasha. Contrasha's star had entered a period of decline, its energy waning. This resulted in a perpetually cold planet, with limited sunlight and a permanent blanket of ice and snow. This climate had caused all of Contrasha's powerful individuals to migrate to other habitable worlds. The remaining locals were largely impoverished and unable to properly govern the city. Consequently, the planet was virtually unsafe, and environmental factors discouraged even powerful civilizations from occupying such a desolate place. For these reasons, Contrasha became a favorite destination for criminals, with illegal businesses flourishing there. Space pirates and fugitives often sought out the planet to sell stolen goods, exchange them for money, purchase resources, or simply relax and indulge. Upon landing on Contrasha, the Enterprise quickly became aware of the unfriendly gazes of those around them. It seems we're not very welcome here, because the environment on Contrasha is harsh. Everyone donned space suits. The bulky armor attracted a lot of attention, and Clark sensed a hint of disdain. No, we're very welcome here. Tony glanced around. He was wearing his Iron Man armor, minus the helmet. We've become prey for most people here. Contrasha's climate is cold, and being able to wear ordinary clothing in such conditions demonstrates strong physical fitness. Conversely, the few people who needed space suits for protection proved their own lack of skill. Similarly, these bulky space suits also implied that their equipment was of low technological quality. Who among those present didn't have a plethora of energy space suits on their ship? Even combat armor was lightweight, so why would they use such a bulky device? So, no matter how you look at it, David and his group were just country bumpkins with average physical fitness and outdated technology, seemingly emerging from nowhere. Thinking of this, the group of robbers suddenly lost interest in them. They might have felt that this group of people didn't have much to gain, including the spaceship that looked brand new, so they were too lazy to rob it. Soon, most of the eyes cast on David and his group disappeared. There was still a small number of poor people who were not picky and were still paying attention to David and his group. What surprised David was that this small number of poor people happened to include the target of himself and his group. Although Zingayan had well and covered his whole body with a tattered cloak, He could not escape David's perception at all. After landing and exiting the cabin, David released his perception. This action was originally intended to lock on those who were still hostile to them. The various technologies on these people's spaceships would become the priority targets of chaos. He didn't expect to have an unexpected gain. This is really great. You blue sister over there, no need to hide anymore. I have noticed you. Chapter 332, Rats Enter the Granary. David looked out at the crowd, while the group he was watching stared at each other, seemingly wondering who David was referring to. No one, however, stepped aside, perhaps figuring that even if David was referring to them as weaklings, they could easily dispatch these country bumpkins, so there was no need to step aside and stay out of the situation. Some even saw this as a good opportunity. Even those who had initially complained about the small amount of meat and considered giving up on robbing the country bumpkins didn't refuse the meat that was right in front of them. A little, so what? There was no reason not to eat it now. Zingayan, because you infiltrated Sovereign Planet and attempted to steal Sovereign Zangar's energy cells, please come with us. The previously unresponsive crowd quickly stepped aside. Who in the universe didn't know the Sovereign's reputation? The Sovereigns possessed impressive technology and combat prowess, but what most intimidated these people was their style. If you offend these little golden men in the slightest, they'll hunt you like crazy. Even if you flee to the ends of the universe, they'll still send their men after you, never stopping until you're completely annihilated. More importantly, the Sovereigns are incredibly proud, and even a simple joke could offend them, which is incredibly unbearable. This has earned the Sovereigns a poor reputation among the various races of the universe, and these bandits, thieves, and fugitives fear nothing more than provoking a sovereign like this. So, upon hearing anything related to the Sovereigns, they quickly retreat. Those who previously thought it was a waste to eat meat right before their mouths now regretted their own lack of agility. Soon, David's gaze was focused solely on a figure cloaked in a robe. Seeing their identity exposed, the figure was clearly targeting them, and there was no point in continuing to hide. Lifting her robes, Nebula, half transformed, revealed her true form. She glared at David with her round, dark eyes. The Sovereigns hired a bunch of country bumpkins, but it doesn't matter. I want to thank you for sending me a new ship. Nebula's left arm had been severely injured, and now the tip of her forearm held only a simple mechanical claw. Having been injured for so long without a proper replacement, it was clear that Nebula hadn't been doing well. It's no wonder she'd resorted to stealing sovereign energy cells, as they fetched exorbitant prices on the black market. Even in her dire straits, Nebula didn't consider David and his group a threat. She drew her pistol and opened fire, intending to dispatch the pursuers and then use their equipment to buy herself a new arm. As for their ship, it might be outdated, but she'd make do for now. David wore power armor, and its Cybertron-derived energy shield wasn't easily breached. So he didn't even try to dodge, taking the two solid shots as he stood there. Zingayan's attack, besides creating waves of energy ripples across his armor, did absolutely no damage at all. Seeing this, Zingayan realized the enemy's armor was far more advanced than she'd anticipated, and the situation seemed to be getting more serious. She put away her pistol and pulled out a telescopic stun baton, hoping the enemy's energy shield only protected against energy weapons and was ineffective against physical damage. Otherwise, the situation would be dire. Unexpectedly, just as she rushed in front of him, another man, also wearing bulky armor, but with a gold background and red patterns on his shoulders, suddenly appeared before her. How did this man appear? Whether he was using some strange power or moving so fast that she hadn't noticed, it wasn't a good sign. But Zingayan had already swung her baton down, and it was too late to withdraw. All she could do was increase her strength, regardless of whether she could injure the enemy or not. She was ready to retreat immediately after the blow and run as far as she could. But something unexpected happened again. Her ferocious and swift attack was caught by the enemy. It wasn't blocked, nor was it shielded by the opponent's armor. Instead, her hand, gripping the short staff, was firmly grasped. Zingayan stared at the man in front of her in shock. He seemed about to say something, but Zingayan seized the opportunity and swung her left hand towards his face. Bang! The mechanical arm slammed into his face with a resounding thud. There was a crackle. But the man's face remained unscathed, while her left hand, as if struck against some solid alloy, was severely damaged. Zingayan wanted to shout, "What race are you? How come your face is tougher than a spaceship's hull?" Now she understood why the Sovereign had hired this group to capture her. but she realized it too late. Her right hand was held tightly in the man's grasp. She had tried to break free but couldn't. This man's grip was stronger than the strongest handcuffs. In this situation, she had only one choice. "I surrender." Clark released Nebula's right hand after hearing this. Seeing him actually let go, Nebula wondered if she could escape now. "I advise you to give up trying, because you can't outrun him." Just as Nebula's thought was forming, she saw the young man who had originally called her out wave his finger at her. A second plan suddenly popped into her head. "That's not a good option either. You can keep working on your next plan." Nebula frowned and looked at David. "Can you read minds? If so, that would explain how he had instantly found her in the crowd, but it also meant she would need to find a way to block his ability before she could escape." "No, I was just testing him. I didn't think you really wanted to hold me hostage." Nebula fell silent. She didn't want to continue talking to him. She didn't like the situation she was in. She wasn't under his control, but she couldn't escape. This was even more painful than being chained up and dragged away. Silently following the other party aboard the ship, Nebula noticed that even once she was aboard, they still hadn't handcuffed her or used any other means to restrict her movement. This irritated her. Wasn't this too much of a disdain for her? Nebula had already devised a third escape plan. While it would be humiliating and involve further trouble, it was certainly better than the current, unpleasant situation. The new plan was to send a message to let the Guardians know of their location. Following the battle on Xander, the Guardians had become known to many throughout the universe. With Star-Lord Peter Quill's recent roaming the universe taking on more and more jobs, their knowledge had grown, and the Guardians were now a star-studded group. Nebula knew that Gamora, a member of the Guardians, would surely come looking for her if she learned of her situation. Just as she was thinking and acting on this thought, most of Nebula's body had been transformed into machinery, capable of connecting to the internet. David, who had been silent until then, suddenly turned around and asked, "Have you notified the Guardians?" Nebula remained silent, but her expression clearly said, "Didn't you say you can't read minds? I just intercepted the message you sent." David certainly couldn't read minds, nor did he possess any talent or skill in that area. It was just that while working, Confusion had unexpectedly intercepted a portion of a signal, sent from his own ship. Upon learning this, David asked Confusion to release the message. It suddenly occurred to him that he and Tony didn't need to scour the universe collecting technical information. After capturing Nebula, they could just wait for the information to arrive. Rocket Raccoon from the Guardians of the Galaxy knew a great deal of technical knowledge, and Star-Lord Peter Quill knew quite a bit as well. If they could strike a deal with the Guardians, trading Nebula for the information, they'd surely accept it. In that case, David and his team would simply need to find a way to seize ownership of Nebula from the Sovereigns. He needed to figure out how to do that. As for now, we're not going back to Sovereign. Clark glanced at David, then at Tony, wondering what they were still doing here. Hadn't they already caught this thief called Nebula? This planet is relatively open, and its network defenses are weak, allowing for the acquisition of a wealth of data and information. Tony had been silent since a moment ago. While Clark dealt with Nebula, he quietly studied the planet's public network and attempted to access more secluded areas. Little Brain was fully engaged in downloading various publicly available data and information, while Confusion, following Tony's instructions, used physical intrusion methods to steal information from specific targets. If all went well, they could acquire all the mainstream low and mid-level technological data in the universe at once. Even these relatively common technologies in the universe would be highly advanced for Earth. If progress continued at an unpredictable pace, it would take Earth countless years to reach this level. According to Tony's estimation, once all this technology was fully assimilated, Earth's civilization would quickly enter the cosmic stage. Similarly, Winter City could also enter the cosmic stage if it digested this information, assuming it wasn't blasted to dust by some unknown creature in orbit. Huh? Look what I found. Not only spaceship alloys and power engines, but also technical data on medicine, artificial intelligence, mechanical life, and bioenhancement. Chapter 333 Chips. Just one trip to Contra yielded an immense harvest. David and Tony were beaming with joy. Laura was also delighted after obtaining a wealth of historical data on cosmic civilizations, the public portion. She'd have something to occupy her free time for quite some time. Clark, while equally interested in a wide range of knowledge, felt it was better to focus on something more practical, so he remained on the sidelines, watching over Nebula. So, you're just a pawn in the team. That's not wrong. She had been trying to stir things up, but she hadn't expected the other party to so readily admit he was a pawn. With this man's strength, why would he be so willing to be a pawn? Nebula was baffled. She felt that this man was a formidable force in the universe, so why would he be so content to be a mere underling? Furthermore, what planet had these individuals come from? What race were they? Nebula calculated and calculated, all the while testing the young man, who seemed to be the leader, to see if he had the ability to read minds. The result was a relief. It seemed the young man truly didn't possess the ability to read minds. His previous attempts had simply guessed her thoughts. While this wasn't a good sign, proving that this seemingly young man was highly observant and capable of accurate judgment, it was still better than having him know everything she was thinking. Nebula pondered over and over again, hoping to increase her chances of escape. David, too, pondered, ultimately realizing that reaching a deal with the Sovereigns wouldn't be difficult. The Sovereigns' energy cells easily attracted attacks from monsters that thrived on energy. He could, like the Guardians of the Galaxy, help the Sovereigns repel the invading monsters. All he needed was Nebula. As for Nebula's theft, just punish her for helping the Sovereigns protect their energy cells. While David wasn't sure how likely his proposal would be accepted, he felt it was a good chance. He then traded Nebula for technical expertise from the Guardians. Nebula alone accomplished most of their goals for this trip to the universe. How satisfying! With his mood lifted, David began to view Nebula with a more favorable eye. Furthermore, his plan needed Nebula's cooperation, so David prepared to have a serious conversation with her. I know you want the Guardians of the Galaxy to rescue you. I have a suggestion that might save you from being imprisoned or otherwise punished by the Sovereigns. Nebula studied David carefully, making sure he wasn't joking. Tell me your suggestion. I'm going to suggest to the Sovereigns that we help Sovereign defend against the monsters attempting to attack the energy cell in exchange for your ownership, and then, Nebula noticed David mentioned ownership, meaning they were simply transferring her from the Sovereigns to him, without changing her status as a captive. What exactly did they want to gain by holding her hostage? Was it to deal with Thanos? At this thought, Nebula's eyes sharpened. Could this group be Thanos' enemies? In that case, maybe she could use it. Before she could finish her thought, David swiftly punctured her fantasy. Trade you for some information from the Guardians of the Galaxy. Information? What kind of information? Did Gamora and her companions possess some earth-shattering secret? A secret that could grant immense power? Although Nebula was Thanos' adopted daughter, deep down she longed to defeat him. So, while she appeared obedient, she secretly did many things to oppose him. When Ronan obtained the Power Stone and stopped obeying Thanos' orders, she had thought the Kree would cause Thanos plenty of trouble. To be defeated by her own sisters and a fool was truly disappointing. The other party's response left Nebula deeply disappointed, even a little angry. They had captured her just to obtain some common technological information? Was that all she was worth? Who were they looking down on? If I give you some technical information, will you just let me go? You? David looked at Nebula. He knew that Nebula had undergone extensive modifications, becoming close to a cyborg life form. She possessed unique advantages in acquiring, receiving, and storing all kinds of information. However, he had never considered Nebula knowledgeable, primarily because the impression she had left on him was that of a warrior. What information can you produce? What information do you want? Nebula wouldn't reveal her cards directly. She wanted to see the other party's offer. Even if she didn't have the technical information they wanted, she could find a way to obtain it. David looked at Nebula and guessed what she was thinking. However, since it involved technical information, he couldn't give a definitive answer, so he had to let Tony talk to Nebula. Although Tony had been busy, he had been following David and Nebula's conversation, so he easily joined the conversation, needing no further explanation. After a moment of discussion, Tony shook his head helplessly. The technical information Nebula could immediately produce, he either already had it or was directing Chaos to steal it. Higher-level data couldn't be obtained on Contrasha. Nebula had no records or storage of such information, aside from specific information. To obtain advanced technological information, she could only find a way to invade the planets that possessed it and steal it. David and his team could also do this. If the technical information I know doesn't satisfy you, I don't think the Guardians of the Galaxy will be able to immediately provide more. David said nothing. At this point, most people didn't know Rocket's true condition. Nebula, for example, might simply have considered him a strange, modified creature, perhaps unsure of what rocket was. "You underestimate those guys," David concluded the negotiation. A brief silence fell on the ship, only to be broken by the casual chatter of David, Laura, and Clark. However, their conversations were all about what are we going to eat soon, and Clark, besides better mastering your powers, maybe you should learn how to fight. Although some of their comments made Nebula want to complain, she suppressed them, sitting quietly and continuing to observe them. David and the others ignored Nebula, as if she didn't exist. David even began to instruct Clark on how to use the biofield. It was an intriguing situation. He'd clearly acquired this skill from Clark, yet he'd mastered it before the original owner, and even had to give him guidance. It felt strangely satisfying. If only I could get a reward like this again in the future, David thought to himself, as he carefully explained the various tricks of using the biofield to Clark. Clark Kent, the very essence of Krypton's central codex, possessed not only unfathomable potential but also a formidable learning ability. David simply explained it briefly, not even needing a demonstration, and Clark quickly grasped the technique. As Clark began to activate the biofield, everything around him experienced a momentary weightlessness, but it lasted only a moment before returning to normal. This didn't mean Clark had stopped using his ability, but rather that, in just a few seconds, he had mastered it, limiting the biofield's effects to himself. Watching Clark slowly float upward, Nebula grew even more curious about the origins and backgrounds of these individuals. At the same time, she revised her judgment of David. She had originally assumed David was a captain because of his high social status or his quick wit, but now it seemed likely that David also possessed considerable strength. Otherwise, how could he have directed that powerful man named Clark? "Done," Tony suddenly declared, and stopped directing chaos to invade a certain area. Converge is a great place. He hadn't expected things to go so smoothly. After only 2 planets, he had already achieved his minimum objective. Next, it would depend on whether David could manipulate and obtain higher-level technical information, but this would be difficult. Through searching the public network, he had learned that higher-level technical information was held in the hands of powerful cosmic empires. These were the most valuable assets of each nation and would not be shared with others. This information was strictly protected, making it difficult for even chaos to steal it. Through his recent understanding, Tony had discovered that the technological level of the advanced civilizations in the universe was quite advanced, and Cybertron's technology was not superior. This meant that chaos would have difficulty silently breaking through the firewall and stealing various information. Watching Lost sneaking back to the Enterprise, Tony asked Little Brain again. He had already downloaded all the necessary data. "Where are we going next?" "Back to Sovereign." "Yes, let's complete the mission Sovereign has assigned us first." David glanced at Nebula, who was observing Lost and Little Brain, then at Clark. "We can also find some monsters for Clark to practice with." Clark was reluctant about fighting humans, but he had no problem dealing with monsters. In fact, when David and the others returned to Sovereign with Nebula, they happened to catch monsters attacking Sovereign, hoping to drain the vast energy from the power cell. David then suggested that Nebula help Sovereign protect the power cell to atone for their sin, and High Priestess Aisha immediately agreed. And then, Nebula witnessed the true power of the Kryptonians up close. Chapter 334, Shining at the Spear of the End. Watching the man named Clark punch a massive monster, sending it flying out of sight, was a truly astonishing sight. This was especially true given that the monster Clark had sent flying wasn't just a normal monster, possessing a massive size. This creature, with a massive mouth, multiple layers of teeth, and numerous tentacles, could hop through space and survive by absorbing energy. Beyond its appearance, its ability to hop through space and absorb energy directly spoke volumes about its formidable capabilities. Even the Sovereigns were wary of such attacks, and given the choice, they would never send their own troops to confront them. Not a single Sovereign was even near the battlefield. They stayed away, waiting for David and his men to finish the fight, either defeat the monster and successfully protect the energy cell, or be defeated, at which point the Sovereigns would have to send their own troops to engage the monster. However, even such a formidable creature couldn't withstand Clark's blow. And judging by the reactions of David, Laura, and the man named Tony, they had clearly anticipated this scenario. Ever since arriving on this platform stacked with energy cells, Tony had been hovering around them, unfazed by the monster's arrival. As for David, he'd actually sat down on the steps, seemingly unprepared to attack. "Alright, done, call it a day," Watching the monster being sent flying, David stood up, dusted off the non-existent dust, and went straight to Aisha to hand in his quest. High Priestess Aisha was a master of business. She explained that David's team needed Sovereign's help in completing a mission to obtain the nebula. Furthermore, Nebula needed at least one defensive mission to clear her name. Furthermore, if David's team desired anything else, Sovereign would consider providing it, in exchange for helping Sovereign protect the energy cells. How many people are targeting your energy cells? The Anurus energy cell is a renowned, highly efficient energy source in the universe, so there are always some unscrupulous individuals who will target it. Besides that, there are also some cosmic creatures that feed on energy and like to invade Sovereign. High Priestess Aisha not only didn't sit in the enormous chair this time, but even descended the steps to speak face to face with David. However, unlike last time, her gaze lingered on Clark, as if observing the differences between Clark and David. She could clearly see that David and Clark were not of the same race. The man who could send monsters flying with a single punch also possessed a highly superior bloodline, but no matter how hard she looked, she couldn't tell Clark's race. So, what's your decision? I'd like to know what else Sovereign can offer in return for what we've proposed. David and his companions exchanged glances and agreed that accepting it was perfectly acceptable. Just as they had planned, they would stay on Sovereign for a while, complete some quests, and win some valuable items. Everyone got what they wanted, a perfect win-win outcome. I understand you desire advanced technological knowledge in the universe. The Sovereign can provide all the technical information you desire. High Priestess Aisha made no secret of the fact that the Sovereign was spying David and his companions, or rather, she made no attempt to conceal it. Aside from the Sovereign's most important technologies for life cultivation and genetic modification, everything else can be used as compensation for your work. David was thrilled to hear this. He hadn't expected High Priestess Aisha to be so generous. The Sovereigns were technologically advanced, their remote control drones capable of seamless operation even from extremely distant star systems. Their detection capabilities were also exceptionally powerful. When Star-Lord and his companions fled to the distant planet Ego, they were unable to evade detection and tracking, and a large number of drones were dispatched to pursue them. He hadn't expected High Priestess Aisha to be even more generous than he had anticipated. If you're willing to offer something, even the Sovereign's unique genetic modification technology is not off the table. Aisha's words shocked every Sovereign in the hall. A group of golden figures fixed their gazes on the High Priest. Even the Sovereign's military commander tried to dissuade Aisha, wondering what had happened to the High Priest. How could he say such a thing? Good suggestion. David didn't ask what he wanted, it was obvious. I'll consider it. If you've made up your mind, feel free to come see me. Aisha immediately arranged accommodations for David and the others. Because David and Clark clearly had high-class bloodlines, they were treated with sovereign courtesy. As for the others, as David's entourage, they were also treated by the Sovereigns. In the days that followed, David and the others lived on Sovereign Planet, helping the Sovereigns with several attacks and thefts. Clark was the one who usually did the fighting, and he was becoming increasingly proficient in the use of his powers. Furthermore, Clark never killed anyone, whether it was other intelligent species that came to steal or monsters seeking to drain their energy. When dealing with thieves, he primarily subdued them and then handed them over to the Sovereigns. When dealing with monsters, he chose to repel them. After helping the Sovereigns protect the energy cells several times, David and his companions not only secured ownership of the nebula but also received a further reward, advanced technological knowledge provided by the Sovereigns. They also gave Nebula a gleaming new mechanical arm. Will your sister really come to rescue you? She wouldn't want you to remain imprisoned in the Sovereigns forever, would she? Holding the shimmering, though who knows what, Sovereign-specific fruit, David looked at Nebula, who had become increasingly familiar with her. He suspected that the bond between Gamora and Nebula in this universe wasn't as deep as he'd assumed. Nebula didn't know how to answer this question. In her mind, Gamora could actually make such a decision. No matter. If they don't come, I'll personally steal the information you want and hand it over to you. Nebula saw David's character and, as long as they negotiated properly, he would be willing to work towards a mutually satisfactory outcome. To put it bluntly, this guy's soft on the soft. If that's the case, I can easily negotiate a reasonable price and redeem myself. Besides, he's strong enough to resist being bullied. Even after all this time, Zingite still hasn't figured out David's true strength. Today should be their chance. Standing on a circular platform lined with energy cells, Zingayan and the others looked up at the sky. Soon, a huge crack appeared in the sky. And the monsters Clark had already sent flying countless times began to fly out one after another. Looks like this is going to be a bit troublesome, Clark frowned, not because of the sheer number of enemies, but because he'd noticed something. These monsters seemed to have been repelled by him previously, and he saw the scars he'd left on several of them. This is your first lesson. Showing mercy to your enemies doesn't necessarily lead to good results. David had anticipated this happening, so he hadn't said anything when Clark had been holding back. Many people are like this. Without seeing the consequences of their own actions, they won't listen to anyone's advice, clinging to their own convictions. Clark glanced at David. As he gradually mastered his powers, he'd begun to believe he could perfectly control every situation. Now, it seemed his assumptions were naive. Especially when it comes to matters of position and survival, all reasoning is meaningless. For these monsters, energy is their food, the very foundation of their existence. Denying them food is like sending them to death. Therefore, these monsters wouldn't be grateful for Clark sparing their lives, they would simply see him as a mortal enemy, a threat to their survival. Just as Clark was pondering how to best address this situation, David had already removed his power armor and unsheathed his Aquaman spear. Seeing the weapon in David's hand, Nebula wasn't surprised. There are many powerful individuals in the universe who favor the use of cold weapons. Of course, the cold weapons used by these powerful individuals aren't strictly speaking considered cold weapons. Many weapons possess various abilities, like those used by the Asgardians. Could he be a member of the Asgardian royal family? Nebula speculated as David soared into the air, heading towards the monsters. Facing a swarm of monsters, David raised his spear forward, then channeled holy light, concentrating it on the tip of Aquaman's spear. He'd originally intended to launch a heart-piercing attack, but as he channeled the holy light, he discovered he could condense it into an even greater force field, transforming himself into a holy spear that pierced the heavens, instantly annihilating every monster on the way. Though he'd never done this before, it didn't hurt to give it a try. As the holy light grew more and more intense, David was completely enveloped in a golden glow. Combined with the long afterglow left by his high-speed flight, just as he'd imagined, he transformed into an immense holy spear, devouring every monster in its path, leaving nothing behind. Rengo Miniad, a soft chant, accompanied by the radiant light, reached everyone's ears. Nebula, stunned, Clark, stunned, and Tony, simply watching the fun, had a look of something's wrong again on her face. But she also admitted that this move was much more shocking than the previous one. Chapter 335 This is a trap. A massive golden beam of light shot diagonally toward the heavens, casting tiny specks of holy light that imbued the entire world with a sacred aura. When the glow faded, only David remained, hovering high in the sky, holding Aquaman's spear upside down. You should wear that light-bringer suit. When David finally landed on the platform after posing for a long time in the air, Laura offered a pertinent suggestion. Your casual outfit doesn't go with what you just did, it was just a spur-of-the-moment decision. I'll pay more attention to detail next time. David had originally planned to string the monster hearts together, like a lucky clover, in a concentric circle. But he decided that this was too environmentally unfriendly. Cooking such a large skewer would undoubtedly cause enormous pollution, so he opted for a cleaner, more environmentally friendly solution. He sheathed his spear and, switching to Holy Light Hunter, aimed at a large energy cell on the platform. Come out. There's no need to hide any longer. David wasn't the only one to notice someone sneaking in nearby, but no one else had made a sound announcement. As David spoke, a green-skinned woman emerged from behind a large battery, raising her hands to signal her intentions. Gamora. Nebula looked at her sister, who had also asked about Thanos' adopted daughter, and knew she was coming for her. Nebula. Gamora had indeed come for Nebula. After receiving news that Nebula had been captured on Sovereign by a mysterious group of mercenaries, she, along with Star-Lord Peter Quill, Rocket Raccoon, Drax, and Groot, had rushed to Sovereign. Given Sovereign's reputation in the universe, they didn't rush in rashly to rescue her, but instead carefully considered a suitable plan. In fact, Peter Quill's initial plan was similar to David's. Understanding the Sovereign's character, he also envisioned establishing a mercenary partnership with him, using Nebula as a reward for the mission, and ultimately rescuing Gamora's sister. Unfortunately, due to David's team's existence, the Sovereigns hadn't considered hiring another team, So High Priestess Aisha flatly rejected the Guardians of the Galaxy. During the conversation, due to lack of clarity on one side and a lack of explanation on the other, Aisha was unaware that the Guardians' intended reward was Nebula, and Star-Lord was unaware that David held Nebula's ownership. The Guardians viewed Nebula as forced to work for the Sovereigns, their only consolation being that she appeared to be suffering no ill treatment and appeared to be doing well. Therefore, they hesitated to rescue her, waiting for the right opportunity. They waited until the monsters attacked the Sovereigns en masse. Peter Quill saw this as the perfect opportunity to rescue Nebula. David's team would undoubtedly be distracted by the large number of monsters, allowing them to seize Nebula and quickly escape Sovereign territory. Everything was planned perfectly, except for the ease with which the other side defeated such a large influx of monsters. I think running away right now is the right thing to do, Elmground, or maybe we can have a good fight and die here. Stop kidding, okay? Fighting a monster like that? Don't you see Peter is practically pissing himself, Elmground? What? I'm not pissing myself. Gamora listened to the cacophony of noise coming from the communicator, feeling both angry and helpless. If those idiots were standing before her, she would definitely give them a good kick. But now, she tried to pretend nothing was wrong, only to realize the next moment that her pretense was completely pointless. I know your friends are hiding nearby. Come out. Gamora's pent-up rage finally erupted, and she roared into the communicator, "Shut up, idiots. We're all exposed now. It's all Peter's fault." Rocket, sporting a jetpack, soared up from the platform below, while simultaneously shifting the blame onto the man in the other direction, who had also flown onto the platform using a jetpack. Drax, still shirtless, stood there, two daggers in hand. As for the now tiny tree-like creature, Groot, perched on Rocket Raccoon's shoulder. David watched the Guardians of the Galaxy appear one after another. This was the second superhero team he'd seen, and compared to the Avengers, this one was known for its rowdiness. From the moment they appeared, they'd been taunting each other non-stop, leaving anyone's head buzzing. David had already briefly briefed Tony and Laura on the Guardians, and after Nebula had gotten to know them, she'd also recounted what had happened on Xandar. Hearing that the Guardians had saved the galaxy, Tony was still curious about them. But after seeing them in person, his reaction was, "They saved the galaxy? That's not funny." Right now, Tony, Laura, and Clark were all speechless or bewildered, and David's attention seemed to be drifting. Suddenly, Star-Lord Peter Quill shouted, and the Guardians charged towards David and his companions. These people had clear divisions of labor and clear objectives. It was clear that Star-Lord and the others' primary goal was to disrupt David, Clark, and the others. Their real target was Tony, because he appeared to be the weakest. Tony, with a hostage in hand, the Guardians could negotiate a possible exchange. However, no matter how well-crafted Star-Lord's battle plan was, it wouldn't work as intended against an opponent with overwhelming power and intimate knowledge of the Guardian situation. Everyone felt a flash of light before a surge of immense force struck them, and the next second they were lying flat on the ground. Walter, he stood up slightly and looked forward. David, who had seemed distracted just moments before, was standing there, gently flexing his wrists, while the others remained motionless. In other words, the one who had sent everyone flying in the blink of an eye was this very creature called David, some unidentified creature from some unknown planet. Previously, they had seen that Nebula wasn't imprisoned, not restrained by handcuffs or other restraints, and had assumed they were using some other method to control her. Otherwise, why wouldn't she run? Now they understood that with the opponent's strength, there was no need for those tactics. Nebula couldn't possibly escape from such a powerful opponent. "Peter, do you have a plan C, plan D, or plan X?" Peter didn't know how to respond to Rocket's question. He did have some contingency plans, but he felt they were useless at this point. The power gap was too great, they weren't even on the same level. Even more devastating, the opponent seemed to understand them well and didn't let the huge difference in strength make him underestimate them. "Maybe, we can try to negotiate." "Negotiate? That's your plan. If you have a better solution, please speak up." Rocket finally shut up. He didn't have a better solution. But he didn't think the opponent would be willing to negotiate with him. Peter Quill, nicknamed Star-Lord, captain of the Guardians of the Galaxy, Peter had already stood up. He touched the spot where he had been hit. Miraculously, he felt little pain, which confirmed his suspicions. The opponent didn't seem to want to embarrass them. At the same time, a strange thought occurred to him. The opponent's posture seemed like they were waiting for their arrival. Was this a trap? I'm David. Nice to meet you. Seeing David's outstretched hand, Peter extended his own and shook it. While he wasn't sure why he'd been looking for him, it looked like he meant no harm. By this time, the others had also realized what was happening, and Drax was even more blunt. We seem to have fallen into a trap. Everyone ignored Drax. Peter carefully sized up David and inquired about his motives. What do you want? Him? David pointed at Rocket Raccoon, startling everyone, including Rocket, who kept glancing at the energy cell. Huh? Me? Rocket looked at David. His first thought was the man who'd created him. Could this group actually be working for that man? At this thought, Rocket tightened his grip on his weapon again. If David hadn't added, "Don't worry, I'm not sent by the Supreme Evolutionary to capture you," he would have already opened fire. I know you're intelligent and knowledgeable about advanced knowledge and technology. It's this information I want. David made his purpose clear in one breath, avoiding any unnecessary misunderstandings. He was after the technical information, not taking Rocket with him. Of course, if Rocket felt the universe was too dangerous and sought a safe place to live, he would be more than welcome. That's it. Peter was a little skeptical, but the other party certainly didn't show any ill intentions. Furthermore, given their strength, if they truly wanted to do something to him and his companions, they wouldn't need to resort to such petty tactics. Ultimately, the Guardians of the Galaxy collectively sheathed their weapons and, standing on the Sovereign Energy battery platform, engaged in a cordial and friendly exchange with David's small team. The two sides discussed the exchange of advanced, sophisticated, and cutting-edge technology across the nebula and quickly reached a consensus. David's first meeting with the Guardians of the Galaxy concluded in a warm and friendly atmosphere. Chapter 336 Temple Number 2. Knowing exactly what David and the others wanted, and that it wouldn't harm himself or his companions or cause irreparable damage to the universe, Peter Quill saw no reason to refuse David's request. It was just some technical knowledge, though he didn't understand why he had to ask Rocket for it. Even though he and Rocket had been partners for quite some time, Peter still didn't know much about Rocket's past. Perhaps he could learn something from this man named David Blamorgan? Since the agreement was reached, Nebula had regained her freedom, and the Guardians of the Galaxy had settled on Sovereign. Rocket spent all day with Tony, probably exchanging ideas. Since he had nothing else to do, he might as well get some information from him. But for now, he could only watch from the sidelines, in the empty training room borrowed specifically from the Sovereigns, as David and the man named Clark sparred. Boom. Bang. Bang. The two men's fists were fast and fierce, making terrifying noises as they struck. Peter, watching these two true men, was stunned and speechless by their training. Who are these two guys? David, Duke of Glamorgan, Lord of Winterfell, is said to be from a place called Brenna. Gamora stood nearby, observing David and Clark, astonished by their fighting prowess. With such strength, could they perhaps defeat Thanos? She seemed to see some hope. After speaking with Nebula, she learned some information about David and his companions, and also understood why they hadn't deliberately controlled Nebula, and why she remained here even after being freed. As Thanos' adopted daughters, they shared a deep vendetta against their adoptive father. Previously, Gamora had only speculated, but now she was certain that Nebula, like herself, was constantly searching for a way to defeat Thanos. Finally, they seemed to see a glimmer of hope. At that moment, Clark's eyes unleashed an incredibly powerful red beam. Simultaneously, David, standing opposite him, raised his hand and unleashed a golden beam. The two energies collided, creating a massive shockwave that sent both flying and slamming them into the wall. The room, constructed with specialized materials and featuring advanced energy fields on the walls, vibrated noticeably after the impact. Not only the few inside, but even the surrounding sovereigns could feel the tremors. But no one was surprised. This had happened so many times recently that they were accustomed. Watching the two monsters continue their clash as if nothing had happened, Peter turned his attention to David's opponent. What about this guy named Clark? Clark Kent, supposedly from Krypton, but I've never heard of this planet. Gamora casually introduced everyone to Peter, including Lara Croft and Tony Stark, emphasizing that they were both from Earth. Peter's expression froze for a few seconds when he heard the word Earth, but he quickly composed himself and tried to act as normal as possible. Peter, what? I heard they were heading back to Earth soon. Don't you want to go back and take a look? Peter was silent for a moment, but ultimately decided not to. Earth was a place he'd regretted, and he felt life in space was more enjoyable. However, as he got to know David and the others, Peter passively learned some of Earth's happenings. He knew Earth had changed so much that he might not even be able to find his home upon returning. If you want to go back, remember to contact me. After spending some time with the Guardians of the Galaxy, Tony and Rocket Raccoon became very close. Although Rocket often did things to deliberately annoy others, Tony didn't mind. Being a genius was a privilege. After all, he often did similar things himself. As for Star-Lord Peter Quill, since the two teams were on Sovereign together and couldn't afford to eat and drink for free, they collaborated several times, fighting against invading enemies or cosmic monsters. Tony quickly realized that Star-Lord was worthy of being the captain of the Guardians of the Galaxy. He had a tremendous talent for planning and commanding battles, making excellent use of all available resources to achieve his goals. He was a very good commander, good at dealing with various emergencies and able to come up with the most appropriate solutions in the shortest time. Tony had reason to suspect that David wanted to use the nebula to lure out the Guardians of the Galaxy, not just to obtain technology. This guy's clearly trying to establish a connection. Maybe he's secretly plotting to bring the Guardians under his wing and put them at his disposal. Next time you're muttering to me, don't say what you're thinking. So, that's really what you're thinking, right? Just for fun. There's no harm in getting to know him. Who knows, you might need Peter's help someday. David didn't deny Tony's suspicions. He had that thought in mind. It's even possible that I won't be the only one needing Peter's help. You might also need Peter and the others' help. What do you mean? For example, if you've almost finished organizing your technology and need to transform it into a physical object, and you're short on technical data for a certain step, or materials that aren't available on Earth, you can ask Peter and the others to get them for you. That's what David thought. As he established contact with the Guardians and built a preliminary rapport, he knew he could easily ask Peter for help with anything he wanted in the Marvel Universe. Besides, Earth in the Marvel Universe was always unstable. While the Guardians were interstellar, Star-Lord's situation meant he couldn't ignore Earth. Whenever the Earth-based Avengers encountered trouble involving cosmic forces, they could turn to Star-Lord and his Guardians of the Galaxy for help. Speaking of which, across Marvel's many parallel universes, more than one Tony had joined the Guardians. Tony even slept with Gamora, and the difference in physical fitness led to an awkward outcome. In this respect, Star-Lord Peter's physical fitness was definitely not ordinary. All in all, this cosmic journey was a complete success. David and Tony had exceeded all the small goals they had set before departure. The only unhappy person was High Priestess Aisha, who didn't get what she wanted and dared not express her dissatisfaction. The longer David lived on Sovereign, the more the Sovereigns understood him, and the less they dared to treat him rudely. Consequently, Star-Lord Peter Quill, who Aisha suspected of sharing David's bloodline, avoided being mocked by the High Priestess for his mixed heritage. So, let's part ways. Peter didn't want to return to Earth just yet. After the deal was completed, he planned to leave Sovereign and continue pursuing his passions in the universe. We'll see each other again someday. This is for you. With Tony's skills and the abundant nanomaterials on the ship, it wouldn't be difficult to improvise a lightweight, high-capacity music device. As for the all-important music, the ship's computer contained nearly every song and music on Earth, providing them with something to entertain themselves during their journey. It contains the vast majority of Earth's songs and music to date, and it even has my personal recommendations. Wow, thank you so much, Peter said, accepting the seemingly insignificant device and thanking Tony sincerely. It also has my personal recommendations. I think your musical tastes are completely different from Tony's. David also said goodbye to Peter. He didn't rush to give Peter and his group the token that would allow them free passage through a winterfall. After all, they could just go to Earth and find Tony Stark when they needed him. Anyway, thank you, and see you later. Watching Star-Lord pilot the ship and lead the Guardians of the Galaxy away from Sovereign, David and the others all turned their attention to Nebula. What? Why didn't you leave with them? I'm not their ally. Nebula had her own plans, and she'd already discussed them with Gamora, who agreed. Staying with David and the others would allow her to better assess their ability to defeat Thanos. David stared at Nebula for a moment, already guessing her thoughts. You want to stay with me so you can see just how strong I am? You want to fight Thanos? You know Thanos, of course. David waved his hand, and everyone boarded the Enterprise. He waved goodbye to High Priestess Aisha in the distance, a madman who's killing people all over the universe. If the original plot had continued, Thanos would soon begin collecting the Infinity Stones and successfully snap his fingers, wiping out half of all life. But now, with a Mind Stone in David's hands, Thanos might not be able to perform that snap. Unless, that cute purple-skinned Thanos suddenly appeared before him and snatched a Mind Stone from him. That giant spaceship up ahead seemed familiar. Shortly after leaving Sovereign, before reaching the jump point, David spotted a massive ship looming in front of the Enterprise. It's the Sanctuary II. David simply thought it looked familiar, but Nebula instantly recognized it as Thanos' Sanctuary II. Why did Thanos suddenly appear? Nebula's question echoed the concerns of everyone present, including David. They were baffled as to why Thanos had suddenly appeared near Sovereign. Was it just a coincidence that Thanos wanted to exterminate half of Sovereign's population? Was there a plot point like this? Chapter 337, Unsuccessful Mission. A beam emanated from the Sanctuary II, enveloping the Enterprise. Mr. Stark, the Enterprise has lost control and is being dragged toward the massive ship across the way. Jarvis' voice chimed in, clarifying the situation. No one panicked, they all looked at David, as if awaiting their captain's decision. Let's see why this Thanos has chosen us. The Sanctuary II had stopped here, rather than heading directly to the nearby planet of Sovereign, apparently specifically to await him, not, as he had previously assumed, to exterminate the Sovereign population. The Enterprise quickly flew into the Sanctuary II. This enormous spaceship, with its vast interior, felt like entering a planet, without the oppressive feeling of being in an enclosed space. After bringing the Enterprise to a steady stop, Tony shut down the engines. He also noticed that parked next to the Enterprise was none other than Star-Lord Peter Quill's Milano. Oh, looks like Peter and the others have been invited as guests, too. David didn't bother looking around. He took the opportunity to unearth his Lightbringer suit and don it. After his space adventures and sparring sessions with Clark, he'd become quite proficient in the use of biofields, capable of surviving in outer space without needing the protection of his old space suit. Clark was in a similar situation, and he didn't want to continue wearing the bulky space suit. Watching David pull out a suit of armor, he turned to Tony and asked, "Do you have anything suitable for me?" "Well," Tony glanced at the equipment nearby. "I can make you one right here." "What are your requirements?" "Anything that's comfortable to move in." "Got it." As David donned the Lightbringer suit, even keeping his cape on, Tony also made Clark's new suit. It was the iconic blue suit, but unlike the original Superman skin tights, Tony's suit had a more metallic feel, with shoulders and a large Kal-El family emblem on the chest, along with armor on the waist, forearms, and calves. The suit, donned by the sturdy Clark, looked quite imposing. "Isn't this red cape too flashy?" Despite his words, Clark's expression betrayed his true feelings. He loved the bright red cape and had no intention of taking it off. "This will become your trademark." Tony also donned his Iron Man suit. As for Brains and Chaos, David ordered the two Minicons to find a place to hide on the spaceship. Their mission was to ensure their own safety. "Don't worry, I'll definitely hide myself perfectly." Brains waved to David and the others, and then, along with Chaos, transformed into inconspicuous electronic devices, blending in with the crowd. Not to mention outsiders, if David had been distracted for even a moment, it would have been difficult to find the two little guys. Let's go meet Thanos." Everyone remained calm throughout. Nebula knew David and Clark were powerful, but David's disregard for Thanos still worried her. Did David have no idea how terrifying Thanos was? Was it really okay to just go straight in? But Nebula had no say on the ship, and David and the others wouldn't listen. They could only quietly follow the group off the Enterprise and follow the group forward. There was no one to guide them, but only one path remained open, as if to tell David and the others, "Just keep going this way, and you'll see me." Thanos, a renowned figure in the universe, was unsurprisingly assuming this stance. In his eyes, David and the others were nothing more than a bunch of unknown individuals who had appeared out of nowhere. As for why Thanos had come to these unknown individuals with such fanfare aboard Temple II, "I simply want to reclaim what's rightfully mine." Thanos sat down on the steps, not in his own chair. He glanced calmly at David, who had just appeared, and made his purpose clear. "Your things, those things I loaned to Loki, but he left them on Earth." Thanos had been about to continue speaking to his daughter, Gamora, but after glancing at David, he suddenly sensed something was amiss. Rising from the steps, the towering Thanos stood like an unreachable mountain. But in Thanos' eyes, This suddenly appearing young human gave him a sense of gazing out over a vast expanse of land, unfathomable, like a brilliant star, radiant and radiant. Things seemed to be getting complicated. He hadn't expected the Mind Stone to be taken by a powerful being. Who is this person? In pursuit of his dreams and grand plans, Thanos constantly gathered intelligence, meticulously studying anyone who might hinder his plans. Such a person had never appeared on his list. This unexpected development left him both displeased and cautious. You mean this? David studied Thanos for a moment, then glanced at his men, then casually took out a Mind Stone and tossed it up and down. Noticing everyone's attention focused on the yellow gem in his hand, David flipped the Mind Stone back into his pocket. I have a question. How did you know I had the Mind Stone? Through Nebula. With Thanos' simple explanation, everyone present finally understood why he had suddenly appeared. Nebula, who had undergone various transformations since childhood, had never imagined that she would inadvertently become Thanos' monitoring, detection, and positioning device. She only learned today that Thanos could actually monitor her every move, though he mostly ignored such trivial matters. What truly concerned him was information related to the Infinity Stones. Therefore, if an Infinity Stone appeared near Nebula, Thanos would be aware of it, allowing him to locate Nebula and arrive directly. Thanos' hasty arrival on Sovereign was due to the fact that he had lost track of the Mind Stone since Loki left it on Earth. This was not a good sign, and for Thanos, who was plotting a grand plan, it was absolutely unacceptable. However, no matter what he did, no matter how many intelligence resources he mobilized, he could not locate the Mind Stone, as if it had left the universe. In reality, the Mind Stone had been sent to Winterfell by Steve, and Thanos naturally could not find it, until David brought the Mind Stone to the Marvel Universe and appeared beside Nebula. To prevent the Mind Stone from disappearing again, Thanos, after locating it, immediately arrived on Sanctuary II, intercepting the Guardians of the Galaxy and David as they were about to leave. So that's what's going on. David had brought a Mind Stone with him, hoping to leverage the Infinity Stone's power and authority to gain some advantage. Unexpectedly, instead of gaining any advantage, he provoked a purple potato spirit. What could he say? Thanos, you're just unlucky. What do you call this? This is called dying before you even achieve your goal. The two men exchanged words, completely ignoring everyone around them. Their eyes seemed fixed on each other, but those ignored didn't express their displeasure. And everyone felt a growing tension. I simply want to reclaim what's rightfully mine. Hand over the gems, and you can leave. I'm not going to hand them over to you. Besides, they weren't yours in the first place, just as I suspected. From the moment I saw you, I knew things would develop in this direction. You're such a good judge of character. In that case, why are we still arguing? Thanos raised his hand. Ebony Maw beside him waved gently, offering the double-headed daggers placed in the corner to Thanos. Come. David had already drawn his Aquaman spear and hammer of judgment. The pink hammer of judgment erupted with brilliant holy light as it appeared, and David threw it forward. Boom. The hammer of judgment, brimming with holy light, struck Thanos' sword with a powerful blow, causing no damage. The immense energy it had unleashed was also shattered, and the pink hammer of judgment fell to the side, its energy already dissipated. David didn't bother retrieving his hammer. The spear in his hand was already engulfed in a thick halo of holy light. It felt as if he wasn't actually holding a spear, but rather a beam of light emanating terrifying might. However, before David could unleash his ultimate, Thanos, with speed belying his size and astonishing agility, swooped down before him, slashing his sword across his face. Shield. Boom. Fleets of light, like falling leaves, instantly filled the air. After the intense flash, most people paused for a moment before recognizing the situation. Thanos' sword had indeed struck David, crumbling his holy light shield. However, the force had been absorbed by the shield, leaving the sword seemingly resting on David's shoulder, harmless. Meanwhile, the beam of light in David's hand had already stirred up a powerful wind, emitting a dazzling, terrifying radiance. Facing an opponent like Thanos, David didn't shout out the name of his move, but it was indeed the same move he had used not long ago, the Spear of the End. The sacred pillar of light that once pierced through heaven and earth shone again before everyone, completely engulfing everything in front of David. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelis. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 338 The Invincible Purple Potato fell. The dazzling holy light illuminated the darkened interior of the ship, creating a massive hole and even puncturing the outer energy field. Fortunately, the sanctuary IF functioned perfectly. After the holy light faded, the energy field quickly recovered, preventing anyone from being sucked into space and killed. But that didn't mean everyone was spared. David's shot not only severely damaged Thanos but also the massive ship itself. No one knew how much damage had been done. Holy flames still lingered in the surrounding area, even Thanos' body, shrouded in a layer of sacred flame. David gazed upon Thanos, struck down by his own shot, and was surprised the purple potato spirit hadn't been instantly shattered. His physical strength was truly astonishing. When watching Avengers: Endgame, many fans raised various questions. For example, why didn't they use a portal to sever Thanos' arm? Why didn't they have Ant-Man shrink to a small size, slip into Thanos' body, and then grow to burst him apart? The official response was that Thanos' physical strength was so great that these tactics wouldn't work against him. But no one had a precise idea of just how powerful it was. Now that David had a clearer idea, he realized its strength was truly astonishing. Given Thanos' physical strength, if Ant-Man dared to use that move, his fate would be horrific. He took a step forward, and just as he took a step, David saw Thanos' loyal minions charging towards him. As he landed, he activated consecration, flooding the ground with a vast expanse of holy light, transforming it into golden hue and radiating a divine glow. The minions that rushed into the consecration area were all burned by the even more ferocious holy flames. Only the massive black dwarf, despite his tough skin, remained steadfast in his charge. The hammer of judgment, which happened to be within the consecration area, was infused with holy light and reconnected with David. Without any gesture or movement, a single thought arose, and the hammer of judgment transformed into the hammer of the Avengers. Filled with holy light, it struck Black Dwarf with pinpoint accuracy, sending him flying and embedding his entire body into the distant wall. Sheathing the hammer of judgment, which had returned to his hand after blasting its target, David, spear still in hand, approached Thanos. The universe's renowned madman appeared utterly disheveled, his body scorched and blackened, including his golden armor, which was noticeably damaged. However, the great sword in his hand remained intact, prompting David to examine it with curiosity. This double-bladed dagger was truly a treasure. It seems you won't get what you want. Thanos had regained his composure, the double-bladed dagger in hand, staring at David. Who are you, David? That wasn't the answer Thanos wanted. He wanted to know David's identity. A name meant nothing to him. You just won't give up, huh? David saw Thanos' expression and knew the Overlord hadn't given up on his plans. He was mulling over how to reverse the situation and plot his strategy to seize the Infinity Stone David held. Everything I do is for the balance of all things in the universe. Thanos raised the dagger, ignoring his injuries, ready to fight the man who stood in his way of his righteous cause. Even if I die, I'll die saving the universe. What you're doing is completely meaningless. Wiping out half of all life will at most cause those species a brief moment of grief. As for population, the resources you've painstakingly saved will become the foundation for this planet's population explosion in the coming period. Thanos was stunned. He stared blankly at David before him for a long moment before asking, "What do you mean by that?" David was speechless. Thanos was supposed to possess a wealth of advanced cosmic knowledge, so how could he not know something so basic? Furthermore, he had a slew of scientists and advisors under his command, so why didn't anyone warn him? Perhaps Thanos had always been focused on doing what he believed was right, and his plans to save the universe were just slogans. His subordinates hadn't considered their true meaning, simply carrying out the tasks Thanos had assigned them. Perhaps Thanos was simply being overly obsessed with his own plans? Or perhaps he'd been blinded by some superpower. Now that David had pointed this out to him, Thanos suddenly realized the folly of his earlier plans. Clang. Thanos' fighting spirit vanished instantly, leaving him in a state of confusion. What had he been up to these past few decades? What was his next move? David didn't care what Thanos thought. Although Thanos didn't want to fight anymore, David had no intention of stopping. Aquaman's spear pierced Thanos' chest with a clean, sharp thrust, piercing his heart. Thanos was momentarily surprised, perhaps not expecting a formidable force like David to launch a surprise attack without a word after he clearly didn't want to continue fighting. While I'm not a good person, you're undoubtedly one of the most evil in the universe. So, initially, David had considered persuading Thanos to abandon his outrageous plan and become Winterfell's new ally in the Marvel Universe. But then he remembered how many planets Thanos had destroyed over the years, making him the most notorious murderer in the universe. While David wasn't a superhero, there was no reason to let such a supervillain go. Besides, he also imagined that if he let Thanos go, he'd suddenly realize upon his return, since killing half wouldn't work, why not just kill them all and create a new, clean universe? It wasn't impossible. Thanos in Avengers 4 had exactly that in mind. Yes, I did kill many. Thanos looked at David, calmly accepting his impending death. Unexpectedly, the opponent continued to act differently. He had barely uttered half his last words when he suddenly pulled back his spear and, with a powerful twist, slashed across. The spear's blade, tinged with a stream of pure water, severed Thanos' head, leaving him no chance to utter the rest of his words. With a flick of his spear, David easily grasped Thanos' double-headed glaive. The glaive was enormous and incredibly heavy. While David certainly could lift it, its sheer size made it difficult to wield. But that didn't mean the weapon was useless to David. His real purpose was to study its material. This thing could shatter Captain America's vibranium shield into smithereens. If David could use alchemy to extract this material, his weapons and Cybertronian body would become even more powerful. Glancing around, the shock of Thanos' sudden death hadn't yet fully dawned on everyone. Especially Gamora and Nebula, Thanos' adopted daughters. They had never imagined that Thanos, their nightmare, could be so casually slain by some unknown, seemingly unnamed individual who had emerged from nowhere. David's relaxed demeanor made it seem as if even a few Thanoses wouldn't be enough for him. Who is this David? Why was he so powerful? Clark had wanted to stop David, but he restrained himself. He already knew Thanos' actions, and David had recently taught him a lesson. Mercy shouldn't be excessively extended to villains. Furthermore, Thanos' appearance was so different from a human, so Clark felt less reluctance to kill such an inhuman villain. But, when David looked at several of Thanos' men injured by the holy light he had released earlier, his words gave Clark a strange feeling. You think this might be pain? No, it's redemption. The universe will return to balance because of your sacrifice. Smile. Even the evil can be baptized by the holy light. Watching David kill Corvus Glaive, Dark Proxima, Ebony Maw, and Black Dwarf one by one, Clark had the illusion that David was the ultimate villain. Is it just my imagination, or does David really look like a villain now? Clark only thought this in his heart, but Tony spoke it out loud. Even more gratifying was that this time, a group of Guardians of the Galaxy echoed his complaints. Honestly, I've been here for a while now, and I didn't feel anything just now, but now I'm really starting to feel scared. Peter had no impression of Thanos, even though Gamora had previously educated him on how terrifying he was. But looking at David now, he felt that this handsome young man was far more terrifying than the purple skin hunk. David, feared by everyone, had merely spoken a few lines, reciting them because they perfectly suited the scene. When he finished and turned around, he realized they were staring at him with the same expression. What's wrong? Nothing, they all chorused, their voices rehearsed countless times. So, Your Excellency the Duke of Glamorgan, Peter and the others knew David's full name and his role as the Duke of Winter. While they didn't know where Winter City was, that didn't matter. What are you going to do with this ship and the Dark Order members aboard? The Dark Order members are likely to have bounties placed on their heads by various factions, right? Adding the bodies lying on the ground, that should fetch a substantial bounty, enough to elevate David from an absolute pauper in the Marvel Universe to a local tycoon. As for the temple II under your feet, you can give it to Tony for research first, and then ask Ant-Man for help to bring it back to Winterfell using PIM particles. If the technology does not develop fast enough, this battleship can even be used as the flagship of Winterfell for a long time. Chapter 339 Kent Group. Due to the large number of Black Order captives and the unexpected discovery of the Sanctuary II, David and his crew were unable to depart Sovereign as planned. A massive spacecraft requires constant maintenance and requires a berth. Earth is clearly unsuitable, primarily because it lacks the capacity to maintain a spacecraft as large as the Sanctuary II. Sovereign possesses the technology and resources, and David's easy slaying of Thanos, the leader of the Black Order and a renowned lunatic in the universe, has led the Sovereign Council to repeatedly warn High Priestess Aisha not to offend this newly ascended cosmic power. Of course, They seem to be aware of Aisha's plans and express their full support. If successful, and the sovereign race reaches a new level of evolution, Aisha's position on sovereign will be unshakable. Aisha, brimming with fighting spirit, no longer adopts a condescending attitude towards David and his companions. Instead, she is incredibly friendly and affable, so amiable that Star-Lord suspects he's dealing with a group of fake sovereigns. Anyway, we'll collect the bounty on your behalf and take a portion of the proceeds as payment. Right, that's it. David wasn't planning on roaming the universe collecting bounties. That task was more suited to the Guardians. Besides, if you're capable of gathering advanced knowledge from across the universe, I'd be happy to purchase it. The Black Order's wanted posters were practically everywhere in the universe, and running through them all was no easy task. But this also meant the bounty was incredibly lucrative, giving David the capital to hire the Guardians. Of course, even if he didn't have a penny, there was a wealthy woman standing by who was willing to foot the bill. That's a good job. Peter Quill had no reason to refuse the assignment. After all, the Guardians usually roamed the universe, so this mission wouldn't interfere with their daily lives, and they could earn some money on the side. With any luck, if they found some unique technical knowledge, they could even earn a little extra from David. He wasn't worried about David being unable to pay. The bounty alone was a staggering sum, and he could see how much the sovereigns costed David. Perhaps Star-Lord and his companions could simply say put it on Master Dai's account whenever they visited Sovereign to buy goods or restock supplies, and the sovereigns wouldn't object. As for the option of pocketing the bounty himself, he hadn't considered it. He didn't know the terrifying power of Thanos, but he had witnessed David's power numerous times, and he didn't want to be targeted by such a powerful being, especially one with an equally formidable group of golden men at his side. The Guardians of the Galaxy departed again, but this time Nebula didn't stay, instead boarding Star-Lord's Milano with her sister Gamora. Thanos was dead, and the sisters' greatest nightmare was over. They no longer had to scour the universe searching for a way to deal with Thanos, and could pursue their own lives. Is it really okay for the Sanctuary II to stay here? I have to fly all the way to Sovereign when I want to do research. Tony was a little unhappy with this arrangement, but he couldn't think of a better solution. That way, I can't stay in Winterfell for long, because the Sanctuary II was so large. Winterfell didn't have space to house it yet. You've acquired so much technology this time. Can you master it all so quickly? You underestimate me. I already have a good grasp of it. With more time, I can upgrade the Enterprise further, making it one of the fastest small ships in the universe. Tony wasn't sure what the fastest ships in the universe were currently, but upgrading one to a level comparable to Star-Lord's Milano wouldn't be a problem for him now. Once Winterfell's industrial complex was complete, he planned to upgrade it and then begin his own spaceship construction project. With the construction of new ships, he would better understand and master these new technologies, and then upgrade the industrial complex again. With this repetitive cycle, Winterfell will soon reach the level of an advanced civilization in the Marvel Universe. This isn't Tony's fantasy, rather, Sanctuary II, besides being the flagship of the Black Order, houses a vast store of technological data. Thanos possesses knowledge comparable to that of the most powerful nations in the universe, and now David has all of it. However, even if ordinary people were to acquire this knowledge, it would be difficult to transform it into something truly useful without decades, even centuries, of dedicated research by countless elite scientists. Tony, however, is confident that he can thoroughly digest all this knowledge in just a few years and lead Winterfell into a new era. David can only say, a true fellow cheater indeed. Clark, watching the two from the side, had a question about what Tony and David were about to do. Is this really a good idea? What do you mean? I mean, forcing technology to a higher level, forcing people into an unfamiliar era without any preparation. Why not? Aren't you worried that ordinary people won't be able to accept this kind of change? David knew Clark was putting himself in the shoes of an ordinary person. Because of his upbringing, Clark believed that this kind of environmental change, which could almost completely alter their outlook, was beyond the average person's ability to accept. But David believed that for ordinary people, whether or not they could adapt to a new environment didn't really depend on their ability, but rather their willingness. Most people's apparent inability to accept new changes stemmed from a resistance and aversion to new things, in other words, an unwillingness to step out of their comfort zone. Environmental changes are happening all the time. Do you think the changes on Earth are minor? David had barely begun, and Tony immediately launched into a flood of examples. From food, clothing, housing, transportation, To entertainment, Earth had undergone tremendous changes in the past few decades. While some people had experienced some discomfort, the vast majority of people were able to adapt quickly to the new life. Humanity's adaptability and potential are truly immense, though sometimes pressure is needed. David's Winter City faces no shortage of pressure. With the Kingdom of Tiran collapsing, Winter City becoming the Duchy of Winter, and the influx of a large population, the existing order is being challenged. Those who cling to the past and refuse to step forward into a new future are destined to be eliminated by the new forces. Sufficiently advanced technology can benefit healthcare, agriculture, production, and many other areas. People no longer need to worry about food, clothing, or illness. Why do you think technological advancement is a bad thing? It can only be said that Superman, raised by an ordinary couple, has developed a kind character, but his perspective is limited. This isn't difficult to solve. As Superman experiences more and learns more, his perspective will broaden. Just like Clark, who was brought along on this cosmic adventure, he learned a great deal during this journey. The increase in combat power is only the most subtle aspect. The real change lies within, a change that could even impact Clark's own world. David wondered if Clark, once he understood the importance of technological advancement, would return to his own world and establish the Kent Technologies Group, then use some of Krypton's advanced technologies to benefit all of humanity. What an interesting idea. David casually brought up the idea in the evening, when Tony was free. Tony immediately thought it was a promising idea, and even considered teaming up with Clark to form a high-tech company. Let's call it Star Kent Technologies. Why not Glamorgan Star Kent Technologies? It could also be Croft Glamorgan Star Kent Technologies. Clark was speechless as he listened to the discussion. Did they forget that he was just a poor kid from the countryside? And no matter how wealthy these people were, they were only wealthy in their own world. Poor? No, you're not poor at all now. Tony waved his arm toward the sky. See that sky full of stars? You can easily obtain wealth that most people can only admire from afar. You mean? The various mineral deposits in the universe. Clark looked up at the stars and immediately understood what Tony meant. But how do I explain the origins of these minerals? Explain. Why should I explain? Tony was a true capitalist. While his ambitions lay elsewhere, that didn't mean he didn't understand how capital worked. As long as you produce results, no one cares how you did it. Besides, it's a technology group. My first venture was space mining technology, isn't that right? As long as Clark could produce a prototype, he was confident that anyone interested in investing in Clark could cover the entire equator. That's too much? Not at all. Besides space mining, there are many other businesses to choose from, such as clean energy technology and sewage and garbage disposal technology. These are the core areas of Stark Corporation's current business in the Marvel Universe. Looking at Stark Corporation's steadily rising market value, one can tell how Earth views these technologies. If you want, you can easily become the richest man in the world. Tony paused for 2 seconds and said, yes, I will definitely become the richest man and step on that bat. If he said it casually just now, Tony has now begun to seriously think about the feasibility of this matter. If he is given some more time, a detailed plan will be born. Chapter 340 New script. David wants to collect Infinity Stones. The Kent Group's affairs were relegated to later, pending schedule. After handing Sanctuary II over to the Sovereign, David and his companions once again set out on their journey back to Earth. In response to High Priestess Aisha's earnest entreaties to stay before departing, David declared, next time, for sure. This time, the return voyage was uneventful. The Enterprise arrived back to Earth smoothly, having activated its cloaking system before approaching Earth to ensure it would not be detected by anyone or any entity. Watching the fighter plane land steadily atop Avengers Tower, the roof then retracting, its engine shutting down completely, a feeling of wonder washed over everyone present. Having lived on an alien planet not so long ago, encountering numerous intelligent alien races and strange monsters, returning to Earth still felt strangely unreal, as if everything before had been but a dream. If someone told me right now that we'd never left Earth and that it was all just a dream, I'd probably believe it. Laura felt she'd experienced many miraculous things, but this space trip still left her feeling unbelievable. Don't worry, no one will tell you that. Tony checked the various files and then had Jarvis re-establish the connection to the mainframe, transferring all the data from the database to his private server. Besides, if you want to go to alien space in the future, you can go anytime. Tony envisioned frequent contact with aliens in the future, not just with the Guardians of the Galaxy, but also with Sovereign. Temple II held a profound allure for him, and he couldn't truly sleep peacefully until he thoroughly understood it. Although he didn't say it, David could already tell that Tony would be devoting his energy and time to learning for quite some time. It looks like your Kent group will be opening later, Clark shrugged. He hadn't been a big fan of starting a company, but he wondered if Tony's previous offer to help him build a device that could search for specific energy fluctuations would be delayed. It's easy. Just give me that item later, and I'll give it to you along with the detection equipment in a few days. For Tony, this was like making himself a cup of coffee, no trouble at all. Thank you. Clark got what he wanted, and now he could better search for information related to his own life story in his own world. He also understood more fully what Tony had said to him. In Winter City, helping each other can help solve problems more quickly. What you consider a big problem might be just a small one for another friend, and a crisis someone else faces might be easily solved by you. Helping each other this way, everyone can live happily. Are you planning to rest here for a few days, or go back? Tony definitely wouldn't be with David and the others. After finishing the equipment Clark had commissioned, he'd spend a few days with Pepper Potts. Unless there was anything special going on, he'd be commuting between the labs. He probably wouldn't be stationed in Winter City permanently, only visiting from time to time. His main focus from now on would be on Earth and Sovereign. He wasn't worried David wouldn't find him. If necessary, David could send Cassilis or Mordo back to deliver a message. Take a couple of days off, maybe go talk to Steve. Come to think of it, I haven't been to Camartage yet. He was curious about the mysterious place and thought it would be nice to visit. Laura was equally interested in such a mysterious place and thought David's idea was a good one. As for Clark, he had nowhere else to go anyway, so he continued to walk with David and Laura. David acted immediately, not even planning to waste time in Avengers Tower. He simply called Steve, who then opened a portal to take them all in. After stepping through the circular portal, which shone like golden sparks, David discovered Steve teaching his disciples. Did it bother you? David looked at Wanda Maximoff, also known as Scarlet Witch, sitting cross-legged, and felt like he'd arrived at a bad time. No problem, I'm just keeping an eye on it to prevent any accidents. Steve was dressed in modern casual attire, his semi-long hair slightly messy, a look that didn't quite fit in with the quaint surroundings. And he wasn't holding a teacup, but a half-filled whiskey glass. I have to admit, you look nothing like the Sorcerer Supreme. It's only temporary, I won't be in office for long. Steve didn't care, nor did he consider changing himself to appear more worthy of the title. Once more people on Camartage have learned the light, and I've trained my successor to become a true sorcerer, I can step down as Sorcerer Supreme. David glanced at Wanda, who was meditating with her eyes closed, appearing to be deeply absorbed in her training, but was actually eavesdropping. He knew the Scarlet Witch was one of Steve's chosen successors. But was she suitable for the position? She was prone to losing her mind at the slightest disagreement. It was said that in the comic book universe, Scarlet Witch's tragic fate was the price she paid for using magic. David wasn't sure if that was the case in this universe, but he knew the Scarlet Witch before him had a similarly bleak future, and she was also insane. Since Steve had used the Time Stone to see the future, he should be aware of this. Could the Sorcerer Supreme have such a profound hidden danger? As if seeing through David's thoughts, Steve didn't even bother finding a place to hide from Wanda. Instead, he stated directly to her face, Stephen Strange is the first choice. David tilted his head to glance at Wanda. The young Scarlet Witch seemed unfazed, still sitting quietly, eavesdropping intently. It seemed Wanda wasn't obsessed with becoming the Sorcerer Supreme, which wasn't surprising. She'd never pursued such things. No matter which version of Wanda, her greatest obsession was always family. Oh, David suddenly thought of a possibility. Could this girl be placing her obsession on Steve? They had a history in the comics. Captain Carter vs. Scarlet Witch? Would Winterfell have that famous scene? And who would Steve help then? Alright, you're here just in time. A thought just popped up in David's mind when Steve suddenly pulled him back to consciousness. I was planning to tell you about this when we go to Winterfell later. What is it? About Wanda going to Winterfell to study the Holy Light. Steve thought about it carefully for a long time. He knew that chaos magic would be the most suitable for Wanda, but learning chaos magic would likely make Wanda embark on that tragic path again. If possible, I hope this child will never learn chaos magic. Well, it seems that the long-awaited scene of Captain Carter fighting the Scarlet Witch is gone. Does Steve treat Wanda as a daughter or a granddaughter? The most suitable is not necessarily the best. A stable choice may make Wanda's life easier. Send her to Winterfell now? Stephen Strange has already appeared. David also thought of another thing. Since Steve is ready to send Wanda away, does it mean that he is ready to fully train another successor? It won't be long before he arrives at Camartage. I suddenly feel like staying a little longer. If Dr. Stephen Strange, with both hands severely injured, finally found Camartage after countless hardships and painstaking efforts, met a legendary master, and discovered that this master was actually the famous Captain America, wouldn't his expression be quite amusing? And then Master Steve Rogers demonstrated magic to him. How would Strange's worldview be shaken? Would he think that the Allies' victory in World War II was actually due to the miraculous power of magic? Captain America was never a product of science and technology, but a miracle created by magic. Not so soon. Steve knew David wanted to watch the fun, but he didn't mind. If David were at Camartage, he'd even let him give Strange some pointers. If you really want to see it, I can let you know. Don't forget to let me know. After chatting about the Sorcerer Supreme, Steve and David discussed Thanos. He hadn't expected David to visit his world for a while and kill Thanos in passing. Even Steve, with a time stone in hand, couldn't have foreseen this. After all, David wasn't from this world. Now, when Steve used the time stone to observe, the future had been shattered into pieces, leaving him with a headache. However, he did see one thing clearly. David's death of Thanos would bring another crisis to Earth. The awakening of a new celestial being will lead to the destruction of Earth. David paused for a moment before realizing what Steve meant. Do you have any ideas? David pondered for a few seconds. He did have an idea, but he wasn't sure how effective it would be. Do you think if I collected all the Infinity Stones and snapped my fingers, could I prevent this destruction? He remembered that the Celestials were incredibly powerful, and he wasn't sure if the Infinity Stones from the cinematic universe would have any effect on them, even an unborn embryo. Steve hadn't expected David to come up with this idea, but it was at least a plan. We can give it a try. Chapter 341 Again and again. To snap one's fingers, besides collecting all the Infinity Stones, one also needs a carrier capable of withstanding their combined effects. This carrier doesn't necessarily have to be a glove, anything else will do. Under normal circumstances, seeking the help of the dwarves of Nidav would be a more reliable option. But David's situation wasn't normal. He could use alchemy to craft a suitable carrier himself and then attach the 6 Infinity Stones to it. The glove is so ugly. I'm thinking of making something more attractive later on. Steve didn't know how to describe this situation. David seemed to have become a part of the 6 Infinity Stones. Before that, shouldn't you first determine their locations? I know where they are. I didn't expect you to remember them so well. Steve's original intention was to remind David if he was unclear or had forgotten, but he didn't expect David to be so knowledgeable about the 6 stones. Did he have his sights set on them long ago? David shrugged. After all, when the Marvel Universe was a global sensation, he'd accidentally fallen into the trap. It was normal for him to know this information. As his abilities improved throughout his life, his memory also improved. With a quick recollection, he could recall everything. Due to the changes he had caused, in this universe, the Mind Stone was currently in his possession, and the Time Stone was in Steve's. Others, such as the Power Stone, were on Xander, the Space Stone was in Asgard, the Reality Stone was in the hands of a collector in the Void, and the Soul Stone was still on Vormir. David suddenly thought of a troubling situation. The other stones were easy to deal with, the collector in the Void was just a little more troublesome, but there were ways to deal with it. The Soul Stone, however, was not so easy to obtain. Did he have to sacrifice his soul to obtain it? Who should he sacrifice? Could he kick the Red Skull, who was guarding the Soul Stone, out of the way? Pinching the bridge of his nose, David realized that this wasn't as simple as he had thought. To collect all 6 Infinity Stones, he needed some careful planning. The most reliable solution was to travel to another parallel universe and borrow the Soul Stone from someone else. To travel to a parallel world, Ant-Man's quantum technology would be needed, and Tony Stark would have to work quickly to develop a locating device, allowing him to travel through the quantum realm to other parallel timelines. This was no simple task. In the original story, Tony diligently researched for years before succeeding by chance. Even if Tony began research immediately, it would still take years at the earliest. He could wait, but I wonder if Earth King could hold out until then? He glanced at Steve, who shook his head. I need to observe more. You don't even understand how to use the time stone, so how could the Ancient One trust you with a location? Steve was speechless. Wasn't it David, the dimensional demon, who had wandered into his universe and messed around with him that was the reason he couldn't accurately observe the future? But he couldn't say anything. After all, in a sense, Kamar-Taj had begun to worship the Lord of Light before him, and he couldn't stand up to him. When will you return to Winterfell? What should he do when faced with a powerful being he couldn't afford to offend? Of course, he was politely sent back to his own territory. Collecting the Infinity Stones was a long-term endeavor, and even if David truly wanted to, now wasn't the time. If the Almighty felt it was inappropriate to return empty-handed, he could offer him a souvenir. My apprentice, Wanda, possesses extraordinary talent and is ready to serve the Almighty. Those weren't Steve's exact words, but the translation was the correct meaning. So, after Clark received the instrument Tony had helped build, and David explained to Tony about the quantum realm in parallel universes, he returned to Winterfell with Laura, Clark, Little Brain, Chaos, and Wanda Maximoff, who hadn't yet become Scarlet Witch. I'm back. I miss this place more than the last time I went out. He reached out and touched the chair in his office. He hadn't expected to miss it. He'd been to Azeroth and spent quite a bit of time there. He'd also visited White Rock, a city in the southern part of the Tiran Kingdom, and spent considerable time in both the capital and White Rock. But he hadn't missed Winterfell particularly much on those occasions. He didn't know why this time. Is it because this trip to space feels so far away? Perhaps. Glancing at the slightly reserved Wanda standing before him, David put aside his feelings for the moment and prepared to settle her. As usual, send the student from Kamar-Taj to Liandrin. However, before sending her to Liandrin, Wanda must first learn the Bronian Common Language. I've learned the Bronian Common Language. Wanda's accent was strange, a mix of Eastern European and New York accents, but at least it was understandable. Judging by her fluency, she had a good command of the Bronian Common Language. That will make things much easier. He summoned Eva and took her to meet Liandrin. The Archbishop of Winterfell would arrange everything for Wanda, and she would then study the teachings of the Holy Light with Bishop Liandrin. At the Cathedral of Light, she would be cared for by her two senior brothers, Caecilius and Mordo, so there was no need to worry about Wanda having trouble integrating into local life due to her unfamiliar surroundings. David and Clark chatted for a while longer, asking about his plans. I'm going to continue cultivating the land. This trip had already delayed him for a while, and he needed to catch up on his lost work. He also planned to use the equipment Tony had provided him to search his own world for clues to his past. If all went well, he might soon find the ship from Krypton. While Clark wasn't sure exactly what kind of ship it would be, he was certain it existed on Earth. After all, Tony and David had told him so much about it. Good luck, David thought for a moment, then finally suggested, actually, if your mother is willing, she could come live in Winterfell. He remembered that this version of Superman's adoptive mother's family wasn't doing well, and it was only thanks to Batman's superpowers that they were able to save their farm. I'll consider it, Clark confirmed his intention. After spending some time with David, Tony, and Laura, he had come to consider them his friends. In reality, Clark, due to his unique circumstances and his experiences, had few friends at this point. David and his friends were the only ones he'd been friends with for so long. After saying goodbye to David, Clark happily returned to cultivating his farmland. David glanced at Laura, who smiled faintly, turned, and vanished. Spending their time either on the spaceship or on Sovereign, the unfamiliar environment and constant presence of others meant they hadn't been particularly intimate. David in this state was a difficult situation to handle, and she'd learned a lesson. It was better to let Helen, Eva, and the others weather the storm. With luck, they might just make it to Winterfell in time for Gwen. David's momentum would fade, then finally reach its limit. He's exhausted, I'm full, he said, so I'm in shock. After a good night's rest, David rose early the next morning, refreshed and refreshed. He glanced at Laura, still sound asleep, with a smug smile on his face. Expecting to defeat yourself through military tactics? Naive. After washing and dressing, she arrived at the dining room. The maid had already prepared breakfast. Sophia and Hood were the only two people sitting at the huge table. Good morning, Your Majesty, Sophia warmly greeted David with a good morning greeting. Her round eyes rolled before she asked, are you going to pick up Laura at lunch? Let her get some rest. She's been traveling so far, she's probably tired. Sophia curled her lips, a look that said, I don't believe you. She hadn't seen Eva at dinner last night, and after dinner, she couldn't find Helen, who loved to wander around Glamorgan Castle. Even Laura was gone at breakfast today. Did she really think Sophia knew nothing? While David was away, her mother had often taken her in for lessons. But she always felt there were some flaws in the knowledge her mother had taught her. What about cows and fields? Were they all the wrong ways? Sophia felt that David didn't look like a cow at all. The people who weren't at the table looked more like one. As David ate his breakfast, his thoughts wandering, Sophia suddenly brought up something that piqued his interest. Did you know? Miss Hood helped James select several warships, and one of them has already been shipped back to Winterfell. Oh, David had simply greeted everyone upon his return yesterday, letting them know that the Duke of Glamorgan had returned to the domain. He hadn't addressed any specific matters, nor had he specifically inquired about any changes in Winterfell during his absence. He hadn't expected James and Hood to have already brought back a warship. Which one was it? And how had it been brought back to Winterfell? Optimus Prime and the Diggers helped bring it back to Winterfell, Hood explained in a clear, even voice, concisely. And I didn't help select this ship either. Commander James Norrington thought the Winterfell Navy would be more familiar with it, so David had guessed the ship after hearing Hood's words. It's the HMS Belfast. Chapter 342. This is how the Rubik's Cube is used. Skyfire initially chose to scan the HMS Belfast, not only for its suitability, but also because it believed the light cruiser was suitable for Winter City's current situation. James Norrington and the sailors he trained had also become familiar with this World War II-era warship. Given a Belfast, they could easily maneuver it and conduct naval battles. Therefore, James's choice of this warship was a logical one. Will the firepower be insufficient? He realized his question was a foolish one the moment he asked it. Was Winter City currently lacking firepower? Absolutely not. Both the Decepticons and the Winter Knights could guarantee sufficient firepower. Even Hood could provide fire support. While the armaments of this humanoid warship were vastly smaller than those of a real warship, its actual power rivaled, if not surpassed, that of the original naval guns. After dinner, I'm going to check out the Winter River. By the way, you didn't know? The military dock has moved further west. After being away for a while, David realized that Winter City had undergone many changes. He probably needed to explore the city himself. That's perfect. I can also take a look around and see what changes have taken place in Winter City recently. Eva couldn't get out of bed, so she couldn't report everything to David. While Elias could do similar work, David thought it would be better to walk around in person. He didn't want to be the kind of ruler who sat in an office all day, relying on reports to understand his territory. Some things can't be described in words, not as clearly as seeing them in person. Come along. I can even be your guide. Sophia's greatest joy was learning everything about Winter City. After living there for so long, she had already gained a thorough understanding of every aspect of Winter City. Especially because of her unique status and her current situation in Castle Glamorgan, many of Winter City's secrets were kept secret from her. It could be said that Sophia knew everything she should know, and even quite a bit that she shouldn't have known. Then let Sophia introduce me to the various changes in Winter City today. Leave it to me. They continued eating. Perhaps thinking about the upcoming trip, Sophia ate much faster, requiring Hood to remind her several times before she could maintain the graceful demeanor expected of a princess. However, no matter how fast she ate, it was useless because she had to wait until David and Hood finished breakfast before she could leave. Luckily, neither of them could bear to watch Sophia sway uncomfortably. They quickly finished their breakfast and left Glamorgan Castle with her. David didn't drive himself, but summoned a guard to take him, Sophia, and Hood to the new military dock in a Glamorgan Castle vehicle. David was still unaware as the car drove toward the banks of the Winter River, then turned north along the newly built road along the riverbank, finally reaching the recently completed bridge. It wasn't until the car sped across the bridge, and he gazed out the window at the vast river below, that he sighed. The Diggers are incredibly efficient. With that feeling, he even considered increasing their benefits, but he couldn't figure out what to increase. Perhaps he should offer a specific bonus? But the question of what reward still vexed him. He'd better ask the Diggers sometime and see what they want. Crossing the long bridge to the other side. This place looked much more desolate than Winter City, but several factories already stood in this area. Has the industrial zone been established? This was the originally designated Winter City Industrial Zone. According to the plan, large factories would be built within this area, with the more important military factories located in more secluded areas. These more visible factories would primarily serve the people of Winter City. Yes, the basic framework has been established. In the future, as Winter City's needs increased, various factories would be established here. According to Sophia, the nobles from the capital of Tiran were eager to build a car factory to produce Winter City's own cars. Of course, the nobles' desire to manufacture cars wasn't just a shrewd attempt to seize the market, as they saw a gap in the industry. Their reasoning was simple: as Winter City grew larger and larger, transportation became increasingly difficult. Commoners didn't mind walking, especially with Winter City's increasingly sophisticated public transportation system, and buses were a popular option. With the population growing, Governor Weatherby Swan ordered the transportation department to increase the number of buses and develop more comprehensive bus routes. However, the nobles were reluctant to share public transportation with the commoners. As for the horse-drawn carriages they had traditionally used, Winter City lacked sufficient horses, with a few remaining in the military, leaving the nobles struggling to secure them. How could the nobles of the Kingdom of Tiran not even have a car to travel? So, the nobles set their sights on Winter City's specialty, cars. This type of vehicle, which doesn't require horses or livestock to pull it, is quite impressive. And since even civilians can ride a bus, Winter City possesses sophisticated automobile manufacturing technology. The current challenge is acquiring the technology and producing specialized vehicles for the nobles. They don't need to worry about the vehicle's appearance. The various cars transformed by the Cybertronian Autobots provide the perfect template. Both in appearance and function, they're perfect. If the nobles want to build cars, they can simply copy the Autobots. Is that so? Winter City's cars don't run on gasoline, but on crystal ore, making them unsuitable for private vehicles. A while ago, David would have rejected the nobles' idea without hesitation, but things are different now. They've acquired a wealth of technology from the Marvel Universe, including highly advanced battery technology. Replacing crystal engines with battery-powered vehicles is technically straightforward. It seems we could hand over some factories to these people to build, then, he would have the nobles pay for the necessary technology from the Winter Alchemy Workshop and his lord, and then have them build the automobile factories. Besides the initial payment, a portion of each future vehicle would also go to the Winter Alchemy Workshop and himself, creating a stable source of income for the workshop and himself. What if the nobles' car factories couldn't sell the cars they built? That was the nobles' business, not David's. As this idea struck David, he realized that not only automotive technology, but many other technologies could be passed on to ordinary people, perhaps even improving Winter City's commercial tax system. I'll talk to Weatherby and Pierre about this later. As David pondered this, the car arrived at the new military dock. This was the westernmost area of Winter City, considered its western frontier. The vast expanse was dominated by a few barracks and a dock in the distance. Judging by the size of the empty space and the location of the barracks, David suspected James Norrington was planning to build a Winter City naval base. Entering through the sentry post at the gate, David arrived at the dock just as James Norrington arrived after receiving the news. "Your Excellency, I heard you've brought in a new warship. I came to see. Which one is it?" 2 Thunderbolt speedboats and 2 Belfasts were docked at the dock. One of them was a Skyfire transformation. They looked identical, making it difficult to tell which was the Skyfire and which was the ordinary warship. "This one," James Norrington pointed to the warship ahead on the left. The Skyfire Belfast was located further west, forming Winterfell's first line of defense. "Let's go up and take a look." The Belfast, a light cruiser moored in the Thames as a museum, was a relatively easy-to-find warship. After returning to Winterfell, James Norrington directed his sailors to thoroughly clean and renovate the Belfast, removing any unused items and restoring it to its original state. However, a thorough inspection and testing of all internal facilities is still required. Restoring full combat effectiveness will likely take some time. James Norrington was incredibly excited as he boarded the warship with his lord. A few years ago, back in Port Royal, even as a Commodore in the Royal Navy, he never imagined he'd one day command such a powerful steel warship. While many issues remained to be addressed, a bright future beckoned, and he believed it wouldn't be long before he could return to the vast oceans. Just as James Norrington was envisioning a bright future of navigating the seas, David, standing on the foredeck of the Belfast, caressing the barrel of its main gun, suddenly had an idea. Without pondering the source of the thought, he simply pulled out a mind cube he'd previously stored in his storage bracelet. David, with one hand touching Belfast and the other holding the blue cube, saw it begin to emit a blue light. It slowly left David's hand and hovered in midair, emitting an increasingly dazzling radiance. Everyone, disembark immediately. James Norrington didn't know what was happening, but he felt his dream of sailing the oceans again might be delayed. Chapter 343 Belfast. A blue glow enveloped the HMS Belfast. David, James Norrington, and the others had already scurried to the dock, where they stood quietly observing the warship, which had recently arrived in Winterfell. Just as James was imagining, perhaps the Duke had imbued the ship with some mysterious power, making it even more powerful, endowed with magical abilities that he could benefit from. Harsh reality shattered his thoughts. The blue light shrank, condensed, and dissipated. The HMS Belfast, visible on the river, vanished, replaced by a white-haired young woman in a blue and white maid outfit, with triple-mounted guns and torpedo tubes suspended beside her. Greetings, Maid Belfast. From this moment on, I dedicate my life to you. Belfast gently lifted the hem of her skirt and saluted David. Then, curiously, she surveyed her surroundings, quickly catching sight of another Belfast not far away. She didn't gaze long at the other ship, quickly returning her gaze to the young man before her. Belfast knew the handsome young man before her was the master she would serve, and she was deeply curious about him. Belfast, yes. While Belfast was studying her, David was studying the white-haired woman before him. From her appearance and attire, David could confirm that Belfast and Hood beside her were from the same production company. But in this case, they couldn't be considered from the same world, could they? Do you know who you are and where you come from? Unless, in the same way that the magic cube she received from Hood transformed the Belfast into a humanoid, it also gave her the memories of that world. But Belfast's answer proved David's suspicions wrong. She was the Belfast, a battleship from the world of the Walking Dead, a veteran of World War II. These experiences had become her memories, the foundation of her existence and birth. She also gained some skills and knowledge related to maid work, but no memories or information related to the Azure world. I see. After a brief conversation, David finally understood how to use the Rubik's Cube. You need a corresponding warship, and while holding the Rubik's Cube, you reach out and touch the warship. The Rubik's Cube will then transform the warship into a humanoid, largely inspired by Hood's world. While summoning requires the corresponding warship, it's still a very powerful item. Judging from Belfast's attitude, does it mean that after use, it will immediately bind the ship to its master? Will all summoned humanoid warships be absolutely loyal to him? Is there such a thing? David stroked his chin, his mind racing to think about which warships he could find or collect. Since the humanoid warships in that world were mainly from World War II, there aren't many warships in modern settings anymore, most of which are docked in museums. Many of them don't have humanoid templates. Can those without humanoid templates use the Rubik's Cube? Furthermore, many warships were sunk in the war. Can these ships be summoned? After all, David has the ability to reach even the deepest ocean floor. Not to mention his Cybertronium body, even with his biofield, he could easily reach the deep seabed. If that were possible, the options would be even greater. Unfortunately, finding those dismantled warships would require traveling to a world set in World War II, and there's currently no one in Winterfell who happened to be living in that time period. Peggy originally lived in a World War II-themed world, but fighting a monster landed her in an alternate dimension. When she escaped, it was already modern times. While arriving in Winterfell changed things, the difference in the flow of time between the alternate dimension and Earth didn't affect Peggy's presence. In other words, when Captain Carter entered the alternate dimension with the monsters, she couldn't return to her original era. This is the main reason Peggy Carter still lives in Winterfell. Unlike Sharon, she hasn't been spending more time in her own world, only visiting Winterfell occasionally. I'm thinking too far ahead. I only have one Rubik's Cube now, and I can't summon many anyway. There are so many warships to choose from, and there aren't enough Rubik's Cubes. When I have a ton of cubes and don't know what to do with them, I can figure out where to find the right warships. Regardless, their navy has become even more powerful. Belfast's humanoid form means David won't have to ask Tony to develop specialized naval power armor. These humanoid warships are more than enough to ensure Winter City's navy's surface combat capabilities. James, it seems you need to choose a new warship. James Norrington had witnessed the entire process and heard the conversation between Belfast and the Duke. Having witnessed Miss Hood's abilities, he wasn't opposed to humanoiding the warships. After all, It would also strengthen Winter City's navy. But, would the Lord humanize a warship for everyone he retrieved? As if anticipating James Norrington's thoughts, David assured him that if he wanted to humanize a warship, he would personally find the appropriate vessel. He wouldn't humanize any subsequent warships James Norrington retrieved. James felt reassured by the Duke's words and began to think about which ship he should bring back. The last time he visited the Walking Dead, he didn't head straight for the Belfast and then return directly to Winterfell. Instead, he took a look around, carefully examining several other well-preserved warships. After a few seconds of deliberation, he decided to choose one of the Missouri, Iowa, or New Jersey. The Winter River was wide and deep enough, so he didn't have to worry about oversized warships being too large to maneuver in the water. As for the larger warships, which would take longer to repair and rebuild after being brought back, this was a minor issue. He could just use it as training for his soldiers. With Winterfell's population booming, he could recruit a large number of new soldiers. He took his lord on a tour of the newly constructed naval base, and James explained its future plans. In addition to barracks and office buildings, it would also house an officer academy and a separate training area for new recruits. It would become a large, comprehensive naval base, encompassing a vast area and offering a wide range of facilities. According to James Norrington's plan, Winter City would establish a true naval base further west, at the mouth of the Winter River. This would serve as Winter City's first outer line of defense. This base would serve as a training ground for naval command, logistics, and recruits and officers. I love this plan. David had originally envisioned establishing Winter City, or rather, the Duchy of Winter's first seaport, east of the Northern Plains. However, considering Winter City's central importance to his power, James Norrington's plan was more in line with Winter City's interests. If possible, while you train the soldiers, you could also go out to sea to investigate specific locations. I've already made plans, David nodded. James Norrington, after all, was a legitimate naval commander, and he had taken all these considerations into account. The original plan was that after the Belfast was thoroughly overhauled and refurbished, he would lead a crew of officers and soldiers on its maiden voyage to the sea, observing any suitable locations near the mouth of the river for a naval base. However, due to the Duke's impulsive decision, this plan had to be postponed. After touring the new naval base, David, Hood, Belfast, and Sophia re-entered the car and departed. In the car, Sophia continued to give David a brief overview of the industrial zone, while Hood chatted with his newcomer, Belfast, introducing her to Winter City. The car drove over the Winter Bridge again, this time their destination being Winter Camp. Unlike the newly constructed Winter Naval Base, where most of the buildings were still in the planning stages, Winter Camp, after years of development and construction, was already well equipped. Even with a sudden influx of new recruits, Winter Camp easily accommodated them, requiring no additional facilities to accommodate them. Winter Camp was built with future growth in mind, and David's design was intended to be a large-scale base. With the influx of Cybertronians, it underwent additional special renovations, resulting in a more lively atmosphere without feeling overcrowded. After the first round of reorganization, the former Tiran legions have been reorganized into the Winter Legion, totaling 1,500 men. Only a handful have been eliminated and transferred to Sheriff Elizabeth Swan. Upon learning that the Duke would be inspecting the city today, Gareth Stanton waited at the barracks gate. After exchanging greetings with a lord, he walked inside while reporting on the recent reorganization efforts. The quality of these soldiers far surpasses that of ordinary recruits, making their integration a breeze. After all, they were all professional soldiers, their qualities unmatched by ordinary men. With such a strong pool of recruits, Gareth Stanton was eager to retain them all. The over 100 eliminated weren't due to unskilled personnel, but rather personal preference. After a period of experience, these individuals learned about the security forces and felt that this risk-free, easier work suited them better than military service. They offered to leave the army and join the security forces, otherwise it wouldn't have been impossible for all to remain. Next, we will begin the second round of reorganization, which involves training in various skills, allowing them to master Winter City's combat methods and weaponry. Chapter 344 Who to choose from the other Rubik's Cube. Gareth was confident. After all, their goal was to become standard winter infantry, and the requirements weren't as stringent as those for the Winter Knights. Given the qualities these soldiers demonstrated, they should all meet the passing standards. After that, the Winter Legion could become the primary force in guard duty and border patrols, freeing elite troops like the Winter Knights and Spartan heavy infantry from these more mundane tasks. As for the Knights of Tiran, according to the Duke's original order, the Tiran Knights and the Guards Knights were to be integrated into the new Tiran Knights. While they retained their old designations, they wouldn't be able to train and fight according to the same model. How should the new Tiran Knights be positioned? Gareth had no idea. Fortunately, there was no rush. After the initial reorganization, the Tiran Knights, numbering over 400, had already mastered the use of Winter City's equipment. According to the schedule, the next step is to continue improving our physical fitness and learning how to use the Blizzard Power Armor. The Tilan Knights and the Royal Guards Knights are the elite of the Tilan Kingdom. Their members are all knights who have undergone rigorous training. Their physical fitness is far superior to that of ordinary people, even compared to the other Tilan legions. With a combined power of medicine, alchemy, and magic, each of these men is a miniature super soldier. Therefore, after completing their initial reorganization, they can begin training in the operation of the Blizzard Power Armor. At this rate, the Tilan Knights will be combat ready in a year, meaning they can wear power armor and take to the battlefield. By then, the Winter Knights will no longer have any significant advantage. Will the Winter Knights give way to the Tilan Knights? Will the Tilan Knights become the ace force of the Duchy of Winter? There was a sense of dissatisfaction in his heart. Although Gareth Stanton was a member of the Tilan Knights, he and Floyd had personally established the Winter Knights. The two men had transformed a small squad of 10 soldiers into a force of nearly 100, each one possessing formidable combat power. He deeply disdained to see his hard work so easily crushed. Therefore, while the Tiran Knights were undergoing winterized military training, the Winter Knights' hellish training program became even more intense. Gareth had clearly stated, within a year, anyone in the Winter Knights who could not master supernatural powers would be eliminated. Furthermore, from this moment on, the Winter Knights would cease recruiting ordinary knights. In addition to meeting physical fitness standards and mastering the necessary combat skills, mastering a supernatural power would become a mandatory requirement for joining the Winter Knights. Also, the logistics force is gradually being strengthened. Besides the Winter Knights and the Spartan heavy infantry, Winter City had been actively developing its logistics force. Talent in driving, maintenance, and other areas had been continuously recruited and trained, and after so much time, some progress had finally been made. The logistics force now had sufficient maintenance personnel and drivers for various vehicles, eliminating the need for Spartan heavy infantry or Winter Knights to double duty on future supply transport missions. Although fighter pilot training is difficult, we've discovered several promising pilots. Perhaps we'll be able to train more pilots in the future, David nodded. This was excellent news. After all, one couldn't rely on mass production of Decepticons, right? He didn't expect to immediately produce a slew of ace fighter pilots. As long as they could take off and land reliably, there were specialists to handle the air transport. It sounds like everything is going smoothly. It might seem like all good news on the military front, but that's not the case. With the reorganization of the army and the influx of new recruits into the Winter Army, problems with weapons, equipment, and ammunition began to emerge. Everything else is easy to fix, but the main problem is the rapid depletion of ammunition. Winter City originally had a limited number of soldiers, and with ammunition stockpiled early on, they'd never run out of weapons and ammunition. The current problem was a coincidence. After the Garand rifles were converted to training weapons, there was still a large inventory of ammunition, so the ammunition production line was only producing a small amount of this type of ammunition. At the time, it was thought that training firearms were primarily for training new recruits in how to use firearms. Once trained to a certain level, they would be using piccolo assault rifles, so a small stockpile would be sufficient. However, they reorganized 2,000 men at once, and after a period of intense training, they completely depleted their stockpile. Control it, organize the training plan. Also, since the Tiran Knights are physically strong enough, let's train them directly with piccolo assault rifles. David pondered for a few seconds, considering building several more production lines for Garand bullets, or even one for Garand rifles. The reason for this was to prepare the Winter Legion to use Garand rifles as their primary weapon, along with light armor and tactical grenades. But after a few seconds of deliberation, he abandoned the plan. Their army was so small, far from being unaffordable. At this stage, they should have provided them with all the necessary equipment, making each soldier the equal of 100. Otherwise, how could they maintain Winter City's basic combat capability? With only 2,000 new recruits, It was not impossible to afford good equipment. So he decisively decided to maintain the current production rate for the Garand rifle, slowly ramping up production. This weapon would inevitably become obsolete in the future, and a way would have to be found to dispose of the excess production. Maybe we can sell it to Varian and Stormwind. Leaving the barracks, David took a drive around Winterfell. Seeing the increasing number of houses, shops, and pedestrians on the streets, David was delighted. Finally, he visited the previously constructed temporary camp and saw that demolition had already begun. Weatherby is very efficient. Properly accommodating nearly 100,000 new residents to a city is no easy task. Even 100,000 ants would be a struggle to keep well fed, let alone 100,000. Even if there were many nobles among them, they would have accommodated themselves, and Winterfell had already prepared a large number of vacant new houses to quickly relocate a group of residents. However, many would still not be able to find housing quickly. David had assumed the temporary camp would last at least a year, but he hadn't expected it to be dismantled in just a few months, before summer had even passed. How did Weatherby do it? The magistrate devised several resettlement plans. They asked the shopkeepers, farmers, and factory owners who employed these people to provide housing for their employees. David had taken a quick look around and overlooked the new apartment buildings that had sprung up near the factories and farmland. These buildings would be perfect for housing these civilians. While the current shop owners in Winter City were self-employed, they often had close connections in their neighborhoods. They could hire 1 or 2 employees and then ask their neighbors if they could rent a room. This was much more convenient and effective than the official door-to-door inquiry. Furthermore, Winter City's infrastructure construction was incredibly rapid. Once the new houses were built, these newly arrived civilians didn't mind sharing space, further reducing rental costs. Thanks to these multi-pronged measures, all these civilians were resettled in such a short period of time. Of course, as these new residents gained stable jobs and income in Winter City, they naturally developed higher expectations for their quality of life. By then, Winter City would undoubtedly have already built a new batch of houses. Even if these people paid to have each one custom built, it wouldn't take long to build. The most chaotic and tense period would have passed. Excellent. I guess I need to consider how to reward Councillor Weatherby Swan. With the influx of people, Winter City's government departments were expanding. David felt it was time to restructure the internal structure of Winter City. He also planned to use this opportunity to explain some things to his subordinates. For example, David would not implement a feudal system in Winter City, meaning that no one under him would ever become a lord. He made this point clear at this time, considering that his subordinates were still relatively small, many of whom came from other worlds. If the local officials grew in number, especially in the military, many of whom were highly decorated and eager to be granted their own fiefdoms, and David suddenly announced that he was done with feudalism, it would be even more likely to cause problems. Rather than waiting for the hidden danger to grow, it would be better to confront the issue directly, while the Knights of Winter and the Spartan Heavy Infantry Regiment haven't yet pursued their territory. Currently, the only official Knights of the Winter Knights are Gareth Stanton and Floyd. However, these two also serve as David's personal knights. Even if they were granted fiefs, they would only be entrusted with fiefdoms, not personally. Therefore, abolishing the fiefdom system would be less objectionable to them. In Winter City, as long as these two don't object, the army won't be in trouble. Even if the Knights of the Tiran Order are dissatisfied, it won't cause much trouble. Even if they resign, David doesn't foresee any impact on Winter City. Furthermore, as long as the Knights' benefits are guaranteed, they won't necessarily leave. After a long tour of Winter City, David finally returned to Castle Glamorgan. Hood took Belfast to choose a room. The newly born humanoid warship made it clear that in addition to combat, he would also serve as Lord Glamorgan's maid, so he would definitely live in Castle Glamorgan. David certainly wouldn't object. As he returned to his office and waited for Weatherby to arrive, he pondered who he should use to summon the other Rubik's Cube. We already have Belfast and Hood, so should we find an aircraft carrier? If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelis. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 345 New Structure and System. David could take his time figuring out who to summon with the remaining Rubik's Cube. There was no rush. After Weatherby Swan arrived, David and his political officer began a serious discussion about how to organize the internal affairs of the Duchy of Winter. Before leaving Winter City for the Marvel Universe, David had already spoken with Weatherby Swan, asking him to take this time to reflect, perhaps even discuss it with others, and come up with a plan. So, when David returned and summoned Weatherby Swan, the political officer had already handed the pre-prepared plan to his lord. Administration, finance, personnel, supervision, agriculture, transportation, and education. The new government departments will include these subordinate agencies. The plan detailed the specific powers and responsibilities of each department, ensuring there would be no overlapping responsibilities or competing powers. At least that seemed to be the case for now. David took a quick look at it, and after considering Weatherby Swan's briefing, he felt the plan was sufficiently comprehensive, with the various departments covering all the current matters Winter City needed to handle. I understand why the military isn't included, but is public security also being singled out? After discussing this with others, I believe the Public Security Department should be treated as a military force. On the Bronian Road, public security was traditionally the domain of soldiers. Winter City itself hadn't clearly defined whether its public security forces were considered military personnel. Most believe that public security forces, who had received military training and possessed a certain level of military proficiency, should be considered a reserve military unit, capable of being equipped as real soldiers in an emergency. Furthermore, as Winter City continued to expand, Elizabeth believed the Public Security Department needed to be reorganized and could no longer function as it did. Elizabeth suggests establishing a police department and a fire department, separating public security management from rescue, firefighting, and disaster relief. Yes, that's fine. The schedule was thick, and David flipped through it, discovering not only Weatherby Swan's plan for restructuring government departments, but also Elizabeth's plan for the Public Security Department. David took a look and saw that, compared to the numerous subdivisions of the civil service, the Public Security Department was simply divided into police, disaster relief, and fire departments. It wasn't complicated at all, and would be much simpler to reorganize than the civil service. Let's proceed with the reorganization according to this plan. After the reorganization, the Winter City government building, southwest of Castle Glamorgan, would become even busier, with previously empty floors and offices gradually filling up. The administrative department, in particular, would be divided into the Duchy of Winter and Winter City. The Duchy of Winter would handle the affairs of the entire northern plains, including Winter City, and would govern more and more areas as its power expanded. Weatherby was currently the Minister of State for the Duchy of Winter and also the administrator of Winter City. He would undoubtedly hand over the governance of Winter City to someone else in the future. David then explained to Weatherby that the Duchy of Winter would not adopt a feudal system. But Weatherby didn't think it would have any impact. Winter City's internal affairs officials were still relatively few, many of them newly recruited junior staff who hadn't yet considered their chances of becoming lords. David truly needed to appease the military. While they had been crushed, they had fought several battles and achieved considerable merit. Before announcing the enfeoffment system, David would have been wise to prepare a comprehensive reward system and ensure the soldiers' welfare before making the announcement. I do have some ideas, and I'd like to hear your opinions. David already had some thoughts in mind, which was why he brought them up at this moment. He asked Weatherby because Weatherby Swan was the most experienced official in Winterfell and should be able to offer a sound judgment. Weatherby nodded, quietly awaiting the Duke's instructions. David, in simple and straightforward terms, outlined his plans for the military. According to his plan, knighthoods would remain in place, but there would be no land grants. In Winterfell, the only ways to acquire land were through land reclamation and purchase. David would issue a series of decrees to restrict land purchases and transactions. He knew that land annexation was difficult to control, but inaction was not an option. He could only take a step-by-step approach. Weatherby felt the Duke seemed to be straying off topic, but he kept his mouth shut and listened quietly. Fortunately, David only mentioned it casually before returning to the original topic. While knighthood didn't grant land, it did grant various benefits from the Duchy of Winter, including but not limited to money. Knighthood and its benefits lasted for life, but didn't pass down to heirs. In other words, while knights lost their own lands, they still had long-term security and a closer bond with the Duchy of Winter. A strong and enduring Duchy of Winter would ensure the continued benefits of your knighthood. Furthermore, this income was more stable than land, and David had prepared a series of promotion and salary increases. For example, the additional income for newly minted knights, not overlapping with their current military income, was equivalent to the current income of an ordinary knight's domain in the Kingdom of Tiran. As knights continued to achieve merit, they could earn more rewards, such as medals, and this income would continue to increase. Furthermore, without the risk of losing their income due to domain failure, David believed this plan would be unpopular. Sounds fine. After listening to the Duke's description, Weatherby felt that if this plan were announced, even if the Duchy of Winter completely abolished its feudal system, the military wouldn't object. The real problem with this plan was that as the army expanded, the Duchy of Winter would have to support a growing class of knights, which would put considerable pressure on its finances. But Winter City didn't seem to have to worry about financial problems in the short term. So, how will your excellency accommodate the nobles from the Tiran capital? Leave them alone for now. Theoretically, they were Tiran nobles, and it wasn't David, the Grand Duke of Winter, who should be responsible for their affairs. But now, with His Majesty Abelson's announcement, everyone in Tiran knew that Duke David, Glamorgan, was the true ruler of Tiran, and therefore the rights of the nobles should be protected by him. If that happens, these people might cause some trouble in Winter City. That'll depend on Elizabeth's performance. Ignoring them would essentially be screening out fools. Those who jumped out early would become examples David used to warn other nobles. Furthermore, the Winter Duchy hadn't yet expanded its influence into the former territory of the Kingdom of Tiran, essentially posing no threat to these nobles. Therefore, after receiving a warning, they likely remained obedient and refrained from further trouble. By the time the Winter Duchy began its formal southward advance, David's power would likely be strong and stable enough that even this small group of nobles wouldn't be able to cause any trouble. Of course, it's possible these nobles could act as spies and undercover agents for other countries for their own benefit. Therefore, for a considerable period of time, the Winter Intelligence Department's focus would be on internal surveillance rather than external attacks. David only briefly mentioned these matters to Weatherby, whose experience informed him of how to coordinate with Edwin Van Cleve. After explaining the matter and securing Weatherby Swan's approval, David then spoke separately with Gareth Stanton and Floyd. As expected, the two had no objection to abolishing the feudal system. The next step was to refine the standards for knightly awards and salary increases. Meanwhile, while the two Royal Guards Knights were reorganizing, they were also spreading the news of the abolition of the feudal system throughout the army. The Winter Intelligence Department began to frequently travel around the city, seeking to obtain immediate feedback. As the news gradually spread, some people expressed dissatisfaction. However, the army remained stable, with only a slight sense of discontent emerging within the Tiran Knights. This is much better than I expected. As time passed, and midsummer arrived, David, as the Grand Duke of Winter, officially issued a series of announcements. These included the abolition of the feudal system and new benefits for the knights. With the announcement, the slight discontent within the army immediately dissipated. The knights of the Tiran Knights felt that with such benefits, the lack of fiefdoms was no big deal. The Winter Knights were in a frenzy of striving for progress. Almost all of them hoped to quickly attain true knighthood, rather than simply the title of member of the order. Through this diligent training, the Winter Knights, in addition to a few commanders and instructors, finally began to see the emergence of true paladins. This wasn't surprising. Under the tutelage of paladins like Terran Fordring and Renaer Mograine, the Winter Knights had already been undergoing authentic paladin training. It was only a matter of time before a true paladin emerged. What truly surprised David was that Megatron had also mastered the light, catching up with his old rival, Optimus Prime, and solidifying his position as Cybertron's supreme military commander. Congratulations, Megatron. Megatron said nothing, but everyone could see the smugness on his face. However, he wasn't letting this lead to complacency. Although he had finally mastered the light and seemed to have caught up with his old rival, Optimus Prime had recently upgraded himself. He'd even modified his own car, allowing him to merge with it, giving him an even more powerful form. Now, Optimus Prime was Cybertron's foremost expert. And Megatron was second only. Leader, shouldn't I upgrade myself too? Chapter 346, All his subordinates are workaholics. It was natural for Megatron to want to upgrade and become stronger, but David couldn't think of a suitable upgrade path. The most reasonable approach seemed to be to choose a similar upgrade method as Optimus Prime and prepare a fusion accessory for himself. But Optimus Prime had a truck bed, So what should Megatron choose? From what he remembered, Megatron had many transformation modes, including space fighters, tanks, trucks, pistols, and so on, but it didn't seem like he had any additional accessories. Realizing that a strange Megatron might be emerging, David directly inquired about his plans. I plan to add more transformation modules, allowing me to have more forms. While the Megatron before him had the most classic look, that didn't mean he could only transform into a pistol like in the classic era. The Megatron before him was, after all, from the movie universe, and currently primarily transformed into a Cybertronian space fighter. Besides that, I'm going to create a ground attack device that can stay aloft, so it can merge with me when necessary. David was quite surprised when Megatron shared his plan. Because of the enemies surrounding this world's outside, Winter City couldn't launch satellites, but they could operate freely within the atmosphere. Therefore, the device Megatron intended to build wouldn't be launched into orbit. Instead, it would utilize anti-gravity technology to hover high above the northern plains, overlooking the entire area. This also meant that Megatron could launch airstrikes against any area of the northern plains at any time. David exclaimed inwardly, "Wow, if he weren't certain of Megatron's absolute loyalty, he would have suspected the Decepticons were about to start another rebellion. If there's no technical problem, I certainly wouldn't object." In reality, Megatron could easily upgrade himself without even asking for his consent. Ultimately, his actions were driven by that central order. With Megatron's loyalty guaranteed, David naturally hoped his loyal subordinate would become even more powerful. "That's it. I'll be undergoing upgrades and transformations for a while, so I'm afraid I won't be able to serve you for a while, leader." "That's not a problem. Winter City won't have any war-related events for a while." Megatron would undergo his transformation, initially to become a versatile warrior while simultaneously manufacturing railgun components that would utilize anti-gravity technology for long-term flight. In reality, Megatron would prefer to evolve directly into Megatron, but with Winter City's current resources and technology, that would be a bit cumbersome. So, he'll transition to this new form first. Later, when Winter City grows stronger and has more resources, he'll upgrade Megatron to space flagship Megatron. In the future, he will, and must, be the flagship of Winter's space fleet. David, just as he was about to summon his Mustang sports car after emerging from Cybertron, pulled up in front of him. "RC, I'll take you home, okay?" As David climbed into the car, he remembered that he'd previously promised to reward the diggers. But first, he had to deal with the Knight's benefits and the restructuring of government departments. Then he was busy having Edwin send intelligence officers to monitor Winterfell. He'd completely forgotten about it. If he hadn't come to Cybertron today, he'd probably have forgotten about it again. Going back to Castle Glamorgan, no. Let's find the diggers first. You know where they are, right? Yes, but they've been scattered all over Winterfell, building various facilities. Which one are you looking for? Let's find Scraper first. Scraper was the diggers' captain and the team's chief architect. After learning a lot of relevant knowledge, Scraper was responsible for designing all of Winterfell's new facilities. David, riding in RC, quickly found Scraper. Scraper was at the edge of Cybertron, seemingly contemplating how to further expand Cybertron and improve its various facilities. "Sir," when David appeared before him, Scraper didn't notice him at first. It took him a while to realize he was standing next to him. "Do you have any new tasks for us?" "No, you've done an excellent job lately. I came here to ask if you and the diggers would like any rewards." Despite being the leader of Cybertron, David had no idea of the Cybertronians' habits or preferences. He knew only that they most desired a new home and a stable energy supply. "Reward?" Scraper was stunned for a moment before realizing what David meant. "This is what we should do. Contributing to Winterfell and your excellency is the best reward for us." David was stunned for a few seconds. His subordinates were so self-aware that he didn't know how to respond. As if unaware of his leader's embarrassment, Scraper continued to express his thoughts sincerely. To him, building things wasn't just work, so he didn't feel bored or tired. On the contrary, if he was asked to do nothing, he would feel uncomfortable. Construction is the nature of the diggers. Their constant busyness is actually their favorite thing to do. The immense sense of accomplishment and joy they experience upon completing a new facility brings them immense satisfaction. Therefore, they desire nothing more than David constantly assigning them work. In that case, rest assured, Winter City will have many, many more facilities waiting for you to build in the future. That would be great. My lord, then, get on with your work. Bidding farewell to the bulldozer, David returned to the McLaren sports car RC had transformed into. He had originally intended to speak with each of the diggers individually, but now that seemed unnecessary. Where are we going next? Let's go see Cordell. The diggers didn't want rewards, they simply wanted to work non-stop. However, Apothecary Cordell's continuous contributions to Winter City warranted a modest reward. Could he be a workaholic like the diggers? The McLaren P1 sped along the smooth roads of Winter City, quickly traveling from the Cybertron area to Apothecary Cordell's residence. Compared to the increasingly densely populated residential areas elsewhere, the area surrounding Cordell's residence still seemed relatively empty, thanks to the vast herb fields surrounding it. Coupled with its proximity to the winter forest, Cordell's residence not only offered expansive views and lush greenery, but was also permeated with a constant aroma of various herbs. Because of their location, RC couldn't drive all the way into the herb fields this time, so they had to stop at the entrance and transform into human form. Watching RC transform into human, David was surprised to discover that RC had unexpectedly changed into human form. You look like, how is it? I changed it a while ago. Very good. David was about to ask, are you getting this look to enjoy a rocking horse? But fearing it might sound like flirting, he bit the urge. They entered Cordell's residence together. The pharmacist usually spent his days there, either busy in the herb fields or in his studio. It wasn't that he couldn't afford assistance, his residence had been expanded, and he now had many assistants around to help with various tasks. However, he wasn't idle, he remained busy every day. He researched new formulas, studied new potions, planted and observed new herbs, and recently opened a new area where he was cultivating and raising some special creatures, also for potion making. When David came to see him, Cordell was in the herb field, inspecting a batch of newly planted herbs. Your Excellency, Cordell had originally been sent to David by Lord Sutton Stewart. At that time, David believed Cordell was either Lord Sutton Stewart's spy or the Temple's. Back then, he was somewhat wary of the apothecary. Unexpectedly, after all this time, Cordell had remained loyal and dedicated, never having any contact with the Temple, nor passing on any information for Sutton Stewart. Only recently, after Lord Sutton Stewart arrived in Winterfell, did Cordell make a point of visiting him. Cordell had successfully proven himself through his performance, and David had lowered his guard, ready to treat him as one of the most important people in Winterfell. Your place is getting more and more beautiful. From the outside, Cordell's herb fields were still primarily green, but upon entering, he discovered that the colors were vibrant, with one area even adorned with vibrant flowers. However, he had no intention of getting closer to admire them. A large sign stood beside that area, "Keep out, extremely toxic, is there anything your excellency may need?" Cordell glanced at the woman accompanying the Duke. He didn't recognize her as RC, assuming she was a new friend. As an old man who had arrived in Winterfell early, having lived through the days of a few small cabins and virtually no soundproofing, he was well aware of his lord's daily habits. Should he persuade the lord to moderate his behavior? No, I'm free today, so I came to see the herb fields and chat with you. Is there anything else you need? Thank you very much for your concern, Lord Duke. Those two simple words made Cordell realize that he had earned the Duke's approval. His future in Winter City would become even brighter. Perhaps, he could sooner realize his dream, to create a powerful enhancement potion with no side effects and no barrier to use. Chapter 347, Invitation from Lord Tiran. Cordell's dream was his greatest motivation for becoming an apothecary. Initially, he thought that joining the dissolute Earl of Sutton Stewart would secure him sufficient research funding. Unexpectedly, not long after joining Earl Stewart, he gave him away to someone else, a young man who had just become a noble. This wasn't a big deal, they were all nobles after all, and becoming a nobleman's personal apothecary would likely offer better pay and benefits than working for Earl Stewart. However, David Glamorgan was a minor border noble, his domain still newly reclaimed wasteland, the most remote and harsh region of the Kingdom of Tiran. At the time, Cordell felt his future was bleak, and he harbored a desire to simply live out his days, save some money, and then leave David for another life. Therefore, when Cordell first arrived in Winter City, he was rather withdrawn, focused on his own affairs, and kept to himself. But as he lived in Winter City for longer, Cordell keenly perceived its uniqueness. The northern plains were a barren land, a fact nearly everyone in the Kingdom of Tiran agreed upon. Through observation, Cordell was certain that the people of Tiran were right. The vast majority of the northern plains were indeed barren, with only certain medicinal herbs requiring specialized environments able to grow there, and their yields were extremely low. However, the situation in Winter City was different. Winter City's fertile land was unbelievably fertile for a city on the northern plains. After a series of experiments, Cordell discovered that within Winter City's sphere of influence, he could successfully cultivate every medicinal herb he knew. Even some herbs that required a specific southern climate thrived after trial plantings. Such a miraculous feat was beyond belief, as he would never believe Winter City was somehow blessed by some mysterious power. Lord David Glamorgan's status in his heart had skyrocketed. Although he maintained a relatively solitary lifestyle, he placed immense importance on Winter City and the missions entrusted to him by the Lord, eager to earn his Lord's approval through his own abilities. Now, the day he had waited for finally arrived. Little did he know that his previous discoveries had only scratched the surface of Winterfell's myriad secrets. He knew about the sanctuary dungeon, the origins of the potions, and the sources of some strange herbs. He also learned of the existence of other worlds. Winterfell was filled with people from other worlds, which was no wonder why so many strangers would suddenly appear there. Furthermore, the Lord had presented him with a vast array of items, including the enhancement technology he had long coveted. While not achieved through potions, these technologies would provide him with a deeper understanding of his pursuits and perhaps help him find the right path more quickly. Cordell began his research frantically, but he was no longer as withdrawn and socially isolated as before. His unique circumstances necessitated frequent contact with colleagues from other worlds, such as Jaina and Sylvanus from Azeroth. Cordell would ask them to bring back some herbs unique to that world. Thus, David, who had intended to reward several meritorious individuals, embarked on a new round of frantic work after personally meeting and discussing it with them, which made him feel a little embarrassed. For the next few days, while everyone else was busy, David continued to lead a relaxed life. He wandered around each day, observing his increasingly prosperous and bustling territory, and discussing upgrade plans with Megatron. It was said that Megatron had his eye on the helicarrier designs Tony had brought to Winter City, the one from Captain America 2, thinking they would be perfect for a flying device. David replied, "As long as you like it, David." Incidentally, David also helped cure Harry Osborn, brought to Winter City by Peter Parker, of his genetic disease. While Harry's family's genetic condition was difficult to treat, it wasn't a problem for Winter City's legion of powerful individuals versed in mystical powers. Even if ordinary healing spells couldn't cure it, finding David, the Lord of the Light, would solve Harry's problems. After a baptism of holy light, if there's a concern about a future recurrence, a golden apple can be consumed. Consuming it will optimize the body, and the genetic disease will surely be completely eradicated. Peter Parker was grateful for David's help, and David felt his spirits had improved, bringing joy to everyone. Upon arriving in Winterfell and learning about this magical place, Harry Osborn also became intrigued by everything within. After all, he was young, and what young person wouldn't be interested in mysterious and extraordinary powers? To this end, Harry directly contributed some of the Osborn Corporation's research findings in exchange for some of Winterfell's technology, intending to increase his control over the Osborn Corporation. If all goes well, Harry Osborn will become Winterfell's representative in that world. He also plans to build an Osborn Manor and laboratory within Winterfell, just like Tony Stark did. As for what benefits Osborn's technology can bring to Winterfell, only time will tell. After some leisurely strolling, David also took the opportunity to test his cheat code to see if it had changed since becoming the Duchy of Winterfell. Aside from the more noticeable changes like increased crystal production, increased energy intensity, and more fertile land, he still couldn't confirm whether his cheat code had unlocked new functions. He wasn't as apprehensive about this as he had initially been, he'd just let it happen. Meanwhile, Peter Parker wasn't the only one seeking help from Winterfell. Ace Agent Ethan Hunt was also in trouble. His team had been wiped out by an unexpected incident, and his superiors suspected him of being an undercover traitor. He needed some help from his friends. That's easy. David knew this was the beginning of a mission, impossible plot. He figured he had some free time, so he might as well go for some fun. Then he was stopped by Ethan, Leon, and the others. Just kidding, Ethan wanted to clear his name and uncover the mastermind. If David, the infiltrator who blew up the Orcs' home base, went there, wouldn't he blow up Langley? Then there would be no way to clear his name, he'd be a traitor, confirmed. He felt it would be more reliable to seek help from fellow agent Leon, and at most, call on Little Brain. If he had a Cybertronian like him to help him with his plan, his chances of success would be greatly increased. As for the great Duke David of Glamorgan, you should stay in Winterfell and rule the world. The tiny CIA simply couldn't afford to provoke such a powerful being. With nothing else to do, David turned to other things, like checking out Megatron's upgrade plans from time to time. Then he thought of RC, who had recently been serving as his vehicle. RC, have you ever considered switching to a different vehicle template? You don't like McLaren sports cars? No, I mean airplane form. The McLaren P1 is a classic model, and Winterfell's smooth, open roads perfectly display the supercar's performance. David didn't see anything wrong with it. RC's aircraft form, however, was still an A-10 attack aircraft. It was time to consider a change. What should it look like? How about this design? David used Cybertron mode to construct a data model, then displayed the resulting data graph as a holographic image, VF-27 Lucifer. Alongside the exterior image, the fighter's various specifications were listed. He had learned these details from a video streamer. As his memory grew stronger, he could retrieve all the information he had read, allowing him to provide such detailed specifications. RC examined the data before her and realized that this fighter was completely different from any Earth fighter. It merely resembled an Earth-like aircraft, but in reality, it was a powerful space weapon. The data indicated that it was a transformer controlled by a pilot. RC studied the data for a moment. While she could transform into the fighter using the data, she might not be able to display some of its abilities. For example, the radar-absorbing warp crystal coating. She had no idea what a warp crystal was. However, the energy shield, heavy quantum cannon, and small missile technology were no problem. This plane is quite nice. RC asked David to transfer the relevant data to her so she could study it carefully back home. If she couldn't figure it out, she could seek help. Perhaps other Cybertronians knew how to perform the abilities she couldn't fully display. After receiving the data, RC left Glamorgan Castle and headed for the Cybertron region to join her compatriots. It wasn't that she was anxious to complete her new transformation, it was Fordring who had suddenly come to see David in Winterfell. What a rare visitor, since returning to Azeroth and helping Lordaeron successfully defeat the Scourge. Tyrion Fordring, as regent of Lordaeron, had only been able to visit occasionally. With David's upgraded powers allowing his representatives to travel between the two worlds, Fordring's visits became even more rare. Everyone understood. After all, Lordaeron was in ruins, and Fordring, as regent, was so busy that he didn't have the time to wander around. His sudden appearance under such circumstances must have been about something important, right? The Queen of Lordaeron's coronation ceremony will be held next month. Here's the invitation. Is the coronation ceremony finally happening? Fordring had mentioned this to him several times, but for various reasons it had been put off again and again. He hadn't expected it to happen so suddenly. Yes, it's been delayed for far too long. We have to get it done quickly, or else we won't be able to do a lot of things. Chapter 348 Urbanization. Without a true succession, many matters remain unjustified, and the Kingdom of Lordaeron feels constrained in its handling of various matters. For this reason, the ministers, including Regent King Fordring, demanded the swift restoration of Lordaeron's capital, even if it meant repairing only the main roads, some blocks, and the palace. As long as the necessary areas for the ceremony were repaired, the succession ceremony could take place immediately. Otherwise, Kalia's orders would lack authority, and she would be unable to issue any truly effective policies. So, Lordaeron's capital is almost repaired, thanks to the diggers' help a while ago. During David's absence, Fordring had loaned several diggers to the Kingdom of Lordaeron. Thanks to their assistance, Lordaeron's capital was repaired at a rapid pace, and preparations for the succession ceremony had already begun. By the way, I haven't congratulated you yet. Grand Duke of Glamorgan, the last time he came here, Fordring had heard that David had become the Grand Duke. This meant that Winterfell had become a duchy. David was now no different from a true king, except for the fact that he wasn't king in name only. One step closer to achieving my goal, thank you. David accepted Fordring's congratulations with a smile. At this point, there was no need to pretend to be a loyal subject of Tiran. He had long since given up on hiding his true intentions. From the moment he issued the decree and proclamation declaring that the Duchy of Winter would no longer practice the feudal system, many had guessed the Duke of Glamorgan's true intentions. While the Duchy of Winter did not practice the feudal system, and pledging loyalty to the Duke didn't entitle one to lordship, that didn't mean one couldn't become a noble. Judging by the previously announced treatment for knights, the Duke would not mistreat his meritorious subjects. Consequently, David's men remained highly motivated, striving for progress and eagerly awaiting the day when the Duchy of Winter would become the Kingdom of Winter. It's a shame Mark hasn't returned yet. He should be soon. We'll be back in Winterfell by winter at the latest. Fordring, Laura, and Mark were the first to arrive in Winterfell. They'd spent the most time together and naturally formed the closest bond. But with Fordring returning to Lordaeron and Mark boarding his flight back to Earth, Laura was the only one who regularly stayed in Winterfell. Sometimes I've thought it would be wonderful to retire in Winterfell for the rest of my life. David, before Fordring could say more, shattered the legendary Paladin's dream. Don't dream. If you stayed in Winterfell, you'd surely become Winterfell's foremost Paladin, commanding countless Paladins across the land and becoming a founding father of the Empire. Fordring was speechless. While David's words were true, was it really okay to say them so bluntly? He'd once thought David needed to develop a thick skin if he wanted to become a king, but now he realized David didn't need to cultivate the thick skin at all. He hadn't shown it before simply because his strength didn't allow it. Besides, you can't possibly be idle. That's right. Fordring had the opportunity to say goodbye and live in seclusion as an ordinary old man. But when he knew his world was about to face great danger, he stood up without hesitation. Whether influenced by David or in his original world, Fordring was not the type to ignore the rampant evil and quietly find a secluded place to live out his days. Also, Rhaenyra and Sally have been here for a long time. It's time to return to the Kingdom of Lordaeron. Rhaenyra Mograine and Sally Whitemane had broadened their horizons in Winterfell. Crucially, without Alexandros Magraine's interference, their relationship was stable and free of any resentment. The Dreadlord's resentment towards the elder Mograine was no longer a factor, leading to a classic scene of filial piety. Without his father's pressure, Rhaenyra Mograine was able to demonstrate his abilities well, indirectly proving his abilities to his father. Furthermore, old Mograine hadn't seen Rono for a long time and missed his eldest son dearly. He repeatedly suggested to Fordring that his son return to help. David wasn't aware of the specifics of the two paladins' discussions. In short, Fordring hoped that after Kalia Menethil ascended the throne as Queen of Lordaeron, Reno and Sally would return to serve the Kingdom of Lordaeron. Who will Lordaeron send to take over the diplomatic post? The two's official positions in Winterfell were as diplomats, paladins, and instructors of the Holy Light, a part-time job for each of them in their free time. Teelan, no, Teelan is going back too. Old Fordring had sent Teelan Fordring here to learn new things and broaden his horizons. He felt that with his son's intelligence, he should have learned a lot over such a long time, and it was time for him to return to help him. As for the person to take over Rono Magraine's diplomatic post, it was his younger brother, Darian Mograine. Why are they all Mograines? Is Lordaeron empty-handed? Honestly, there really aren't any talented people left. The Undead Scourge and the Scourge Legion wreaked havoc on Lordaeron. Not only were lives lost, civilians displaced, the land polluted, and countless soldiers killed, but also countless lords and nobles perished. This was devastating for a feudal kingdom. With such a vast territory left unattended, the only people Kalia Menethil could use were these people. Of the younger generation, the only talented individuals were Mograine's son, her own son, and the Abendis maid. Under these circumstances, it's not surprising that these young people were given special training. Sending them to Winterfell to learn various subjects was a form of specialized training. Ordinary people wouldn't qualify. However, not all factions viewed Winterfell as a prime destination for study abroad. The mage city of Dalaran had a different view. Although they had learned much about Winterfell from Jaina, they had some understanding of this otherworldly city. However, the mages didn't see Wintercity as anything special. Instead, they valued its remote location on another world. It was the perfect place to deal with troublesome mages. The mages of Dalaran had already decided to send their most troublesome mage, Ronan, to Wintercity to replace Jaina as Dalaran's diplomat to Wintercity. As for Jaina, she wouldn't be recalled to Dalaran, as she represented both Dalaran and Kultiris, so she would remain in Wintercity. Why did this news come from Fordring? Because Dalaran had sent Ronan directly to Lordaeron. He would first represent Dalaran at the coronation ceremony of the Queen of Lordaeron before traveling to Wintercity. Upon arriving in Lordaeron, Ronin visited Fordring directly and informed the regent of Lordaeron of his upcoming plans, which is how Fordring learned of all this. Ronin? He's still so unpopular with his fellow mages, that shouldn't be a problem for you. While Ronin wasn't popular with the other mages in Dalaran, he was a powerful mage with a trustworthy character. David would probably welcome him, as long as he didn't blow up Winterfell. After chatting about Azeroth for a while, Fordring inquired about the situation in Winterfell. He'd stopped by frequently at first, but then less frequently. His occasional visits were just a general overview of Winterfell, and after confirming David was okay, he didn't ask for detailed questions. Today, with more time on his hands, he inquired more. His questions revealed just how much Winterfell had changed. Not only had Winterfell expanded, but a naval base had been built across the Winter River. There were even new development plans to completely connect Winterfell, Frostwatch, and Snowfort to form a massive urban complex. It's astonishing. Fordring had learned what a modern urban cluster was and knew this design was in line with future development. But he lived in a relatively backward world after all, and the castles, cities, towns, and villages he had seen since childhood had formed a fixed impression in his mind. Even David's own city initially developed according to the methods he was familiar with. Yet, David's Winter City had barely begun to take on the airs of a major city when he began preparing to build a modern urban cluster. This leapfrogging approach left him feeling a bit bewildered. Actually, it's not really an urban cluster, it's just connecting the scattered territories we have. At least until the entire northern plains were developed, it could be considered a true urban cluster, and then gradually expand outward. The ultimate goal was to have only one city on the entire continent of Brunia, or even just Winter City on the entire planet. Sounds grand and spectacular, Fordring said. He seriously considered whether the Kingdom of Lordaeron could do the same. He didn't have to worry about the technology. The fact that Winter City could do this proved they had the relevant technology. He only needed to consider what kind of bargaining chip he could use to buy the relevant technology from David. By the way, there's something I'd like to get your opinion on. After listening to David's detailed account of the various changes in Winterfell during this period, Fordring wanted to ask David, the increasingly mature ruler, what choice he would make if you were faced with this kind of problem. After Her Majesty the Queen ascends the throne, should she continue to quietly clean up the impact of the Scourge and restore the strength of the Kingdom of Lordaeron? Or, after initially stabilizing the situation in the kingdom, should she immediately mobilize the army and go on a sea expedition to Northrend with other allies? Although the succession ceremony had not yet taken place, the direction of the Kingdom of Lordaeron's development after Her Majesty the Queen ascended the throne had been discussed many times, but no consensus had been reached. This matter, from my plans for Winterfell, you should be able to see my inclination, right? Chapter 349, Iron Tree Castle wants to purchase weapons. If David had to choose, he would definitely choose to quietly farm and recuperate, waiting until Lordaeron's strength had recovered sufficiently before considering an expedition to Northrend. It wasn't that he loved peace, but he simply felt that unless they had built up enough strength to annihilate the enemy in a single blow, a rash attack would be unlikely to truly achieve their goals. However, the Lich King poses too great a threat to Azeroth. It's truly unsuitable to remain there forever. David understood the circumstances and had to make a decision based on the circumstances. The Lich King's threat to Lordaeron was simply not on the same level as his own kingdoms, the Kingdom of Tiran, the Temple, and so on. If he remained in Northrend, who knew what kind of trouble he would cause? By then, Fordring would have no plot advantage to fall back on. The two sides would be back to a level playing field, potentially leading to an unexpected crisis. Fordring didn't interrupt, quietly waiting for David's next words. After a while, David didn't continue. That's all. He seemed to have said something, but it also seemed like nothing. Fordring looked at David speechlessly. I know you're a mature lord, but don't try to smooth things over like those politicians. Actually, what I'm saying is, under normal circumstances, I'd choose to recuperate and restore the kingdom to its former glory, but this time, the enemy's situation is unique, so it's safer to eliminate them as soon as possible. In other words, when faced with the Lich King, David supported Lordaeron's allies in launching an expedition. Indeed, the Lich King's presence is too dangerous. Not only would the Lich King, Ner'zhul, lure the Burning Legion to Azeroth, but he also harbored a conspiracy from the Shadowlands. From every perspective, eliminating the Lich King quickly was the right choice. Fordring had already made up his mind. Upon returning, He would do his utmost to persuade those who opposed the expedition. After David's reminder, he came up with a compelling argument: without the Lich King's destruction, the undead scourge within Lordaeron could never be completely eradicated, as the Lich King, hiding in Northrend, was the root cause of all the scourge. Only by completely destroying the Lich King could the Kingdom of Lordaeron truly begin to recuperate and return to its former prosperity. If you need any help, ask. I won't hold back. Fordring calculated the forces he could mobilize. Besides Lordaeron's army, Quel'Thalas and Dalaran would certainly contribute. After all, the damage caused by the scourge had also affected these two factions. Ironforge, one of Lordaeron's most steadfast allies, would continue to provide them with ample support for this expedition. Furthermore, perhaps Kul Tiras could be called upon. The Kul Tiran fleet's assistance would make the expedition to Northrend much easier. If possible, Fordring would like to contact the Night Elves and have them join the coalition, but this proved difficult. As for Stormwind, far to the south, he initially hoped it could provide material support. After all, Lordaeron was in ruins, and many areas were polluted, making it impossible to grow food. Stormwind, with its vast tracts of fertile land, should have no shortage of food. Especially since he had helped Stormwind eliminate the enormous problem of Onyxia a few years earlier. Shouldn't Stormwind have recovered after all these years? However, after meeting Varian not long ago, he realized that Stormwind's situation hadn't improved much at all. It was still riddled with problems, and the various hidden dangers had already caused King Varian Rin to start losing his hair. Under these circumstances, Stormwind couldn't be relied upon for an expedition to Northrend. Besides, Fordring's only ally was Winterfell. If the battle became unfavorable or stalemated, Fordring could call for reinforcements. Whether it was the Winter Knights, Spartan heavy infantry, or Cybertronian warriors, they were all excellent options for tipping the balance of power. Not to mention the Light Incarnate, Duke David of Glamorgan. I'm going back now. Remember to attend the ceremony. Don't worry, I won't forget. David casually handed the invitation to Eva, who had just been summoned. After checking the date, Eva immediately noted it in her work schedule. 2 days before the ceremony, she would notify David to prepare and arrange his schedule in advance to ensure he wouldn't be otherwise occupied during those days. Fordring felt relieved by this and prepared to go find his son, Telan, to show him around Winterfell. They would return to Azeroth when the time was right. I won't come to say goodbye to you then, no need for all the formalities. Just be yourself. After waving goodbye to old Fordring, David turned to Eva. Did anyone see me? Eva didn't leave immediately after noting the details, indicating she had other matters to report. Most of the time, it was just someone who suddenly called on him. It's Viscount Maloney Mansfield. Viscount, yes, old Mansfield passed away not long ago, and Maloney Mansfield inherited the title. Maloney Mansfield was an old acquaintance of David's. When they first met at Iron Tree Keep, Maloney Mansfield was merely the inspector of Iron Tree Keep. Back then, David only knew Maloney Mansfield was of noble birth. He later learned he held no title. But now, his status has changed, and with his considerable abilities, having inherited his father's title, he has become an even more important figure within Iron Tree Keep. Maloney Mansfield also serves as the liaison between Iron Tree Keep and Winterfell. Iron Tree Keep's lord, Marcus Dudley Morgan, has always had Maloney Mansfield traveling between the two places to maintain ties with Winterfell. Besides Viscount Maloney Mansfield, Earl Sutton Stewart is also out there. Huh? Why is he here? After arriving in Winter City from White Rock, Earl Sutton Stewart quietly recuperated for a while. Then, like most of the Tiran nobles, he began searching for a desirable location in Winter City to build his own mansion. David had recently traveled to the Marvel Universe, so he didn't know what Sutton Stewart was up to. He said he wanted to catch up with you. David decided to meet Maloney first. He usually came to Winter City on official business, so the meeting with Sutton could be postponed. Where's Sophia? She's chatting with Belfast. Since arriving in Winter City, or rather settling in at Castle Glamorgan, Belfast has been studying various things. He's mainly interested in the lifestyles and dietary habits of the residents of Castle Glamorgan, as well as the details and skills of the maids there. By now, Belfast had memorized all the information and was effectively coordinating and managing the internal affairs of Glamorgan Castle. Even without resorting to forceful tactics, she had successfully become a de facto housekeeper. Let Sophia entertain her uncle first. I'll speak with Viscount Maloney Mansfield first, okay? Eva turned and left the office, followed by Viscount Maloney Mansfield. The noble officials, whom David once had to treat with courtesy, now had to greet David first. Maloney Mansfield showed no displeasure, his etiquette was impeccable. When he explained his purpose for coming to Winterfell, David understood Maloney's respectful manner. Iron Tree Keep had recently been at war with the elves of the Iron Tree Forest. The prolonged conflict had resulted in severe losses for Iron Tree Keep, not only in heavy casualties but also in a shortage of reserve troops and a significant loss of weaponry. Therefore, Iron Tree Keep wanted to purchase a batch of weapons from Winterfell. Purchase weapons? Yes, that's probably a bit tricky. Winter City is reorganizing its army, and the weapons we're currently producing aren't enough for our own needs. David wasn't kidding Maloney. Winter City's weapons were indeed insufficient. Even if the entire army was fully equipped, they would need to continue production and maintain a sufficient inventory to ensure sufficient backup resources. This way, whether it was for temporary military expansion or replacing damaged equipment, they could ensure sufficient weapons for the front lines immediately. Besides, I'm afraid Iron Tree Fort won't be able to use Winter City's weapons and equipment. Maloney was a little disappointed, but then he realized he had misunderstood. No, I'm not talking about the Winter Knight's Blizzard Power Armor and Piccolo Assault Rifles, but Winter City's training equipment. Training equipment, David realized. Winter City's training equipment was actually the same kind they used before, lightweight armor and cold weapons infused with crystal or powder. Was that what Iron Tree Fort wanted to buy? And the Garand rifle. Maloney Mansfield had traveled between the two cities frequently and had lived in Winter City for a period of time, so he had a certain understanding of Winter City's situation. The Blizzard Power Armor, Piccolo Assault Rifles, and Garand rifles were no secret to begin with. A little inquiry would reveal them. David, looking at Maloney Stanfield before him, realized that his real intention was the Garand rifles. The armor, sword, and spear were likely smokescreens. As for the power armor and Piccolo Assault Rifles, anyone with a common sense would know they were simply unavailable. So, the question was, could the Garand rifles be sold? David pondered the matter and decided to discuss it with his subordinates. If he did, his plan to maintain the existing production line might have to be reconsidered. Maloney didn't push him, and Duke David of Glamorgan didn't outright refuse, a good sign, proving the matter wasn't beyond negotiation. Procuring a batch of Garand rifles would quickly replace the loss of Iron Tree Fort's numerous archers. After all, training a gunner is much easier than training an archer. Chapter 350 Understand You. If possible, Maloney also wanted to purchase weapons like grenades. If they could, Iron Tree Keep, their fortress, would no longer have to fear elven attacks. He felt the chances of success were high. David Glamorgan, Duke of Winter, would not sit idly by and watch Iron Tree Keep fall to the elves. It would be a disaster for the newly appointed duke and a significant blow to his reputation. Numerous lords within the Kingdom of Tiran were watching closely. Maloney could never have imagined that Duke David Glamorgan cared nothing about these matters, nor did he care what the Tiran lords thought of him. In fact, the elves' capture of Iron Tree Keep would be a good thing for him. That way, he could reasonably send his troops south, drive out the elves, and then seize the entire territory of Iron Tree Keep. To put it bluntly, he longed for chaos throughout Tiran, ideally, for the entire Kingdom of Tiran to erupt in fighting, ideally everywhere except the northern plains. He would clearly declare his rebellion against Tiran, which would clear the way for his future southward advance. With only a handful of lords rebelling against the Tiran kingdom, while the majority still fly under the Tiran banner, it's much harder to deal with. He's clearly still managing the northern plains, otherwise, he'd have to find a reason to march south and seize control of the land. That would likely spark discontent from all sides, and with all the back and forth, he'd ultimately have to resort to force. It would be easier to just wait for the lords to rebel against the Tiran kingdom from the start, and then deal with it himself. Watching Maloney leave, David stood up and walked around from behind his large desk. As he left the office, Eva seemed to have anticipated David's arrival and was waiting there specifically. Lord Sutton Stewart and Her Royal Highness Princess Sophia are on the rooftop. Oh, should we notify them to come down? David waved his hand. He was growing bored from sitting there, so he decided to head up to the rooftop to find Earl Stewart. Just to relax and unwind, he decided, I'll go find them. After all, Earl Sutton Stewart was one of his own, so there was no need to dwell on etiquette or regulations. Elias, standing beside him, shared the same thought, so he didn't object. continuing to quietly follow the Duke, pretending he didn't exist. Reaching the top floor and then the open-air terrace, David immediately spotted Sutton Stewart, standing on the edge, surveying the surroundings, and Sophia, nearby, introducing her uncle. Not far behind them, Belfast, still dressed in her maid outfit, stood there. Upon seeing David arrive, she immediately bowed and greeted him, alerting the others, the Duke had arrived. "Your Excellency." Sutton Stewart turned and immediately saluted David, a look of emotion on her face. He had never imagined that the young man he had once considered prey would now stand at the pinnacle of the Tiran kingdom. Although he hadn't yet become king, judging by the current developments, it was only a matter of time before the Duchy of Winter became the Kingdom of Winter. Sutton Stewart didn't seem resentful. The Tiran kingdom was so thoroughly infiltrated that trouble was inevitable. However, at the time, he hadn't imagined the temple's actions would be so ruthless. Only then did he realize how naive his initial calculations had been. Considering the events of the temple, he felt incredibly lucky to still be able to live so carefree, especially since Duke David of Glamorgan hadn't treated him unfairly. "What brings you here today?" Sutton Stewart's expression relaxed at David's tone and choice of words. From this single question alone, Sutton could conclude that Duke David of Glamorgan was quite approachable, at least not using formulaic phrases to address him. "I'm here to apply for a job." "Huh?" David speculated, but he hadn't imagined Sutton was seeking a job. A job, yes. After a brief explanation, David realized that Sutton had arrived later than the other nobles who had arrived at Winterfell immediately, and that much of the Stewart family's wealth had been confiscated by the Duke. The nobles who had returned to Winterfell after their resurrection could personally identify their own property and pay Cybertronians to help them dig it up. Despite losing their homes and being exiled from their fiefdoms, the nobles still had their savings, enough to provide them with little worry for their immediate survival. Some of the nobles who survived White Rock City had family members in the Tiran capital, thus preserving their assets. The assets of those who failed to be resurrected became the spoils of Duke David, whose personal stash was dug up and directly deposited into his coffers. Among these assets was Sutton Stewart's fortune. While Sophia and Queen Rosie had pointed out that some of the assets belonged to Sutton, others had been acquired and stored separately by Sutton himself, unknown to the mother and daughter. Sutton was not present at the time, and thus ended up in David's pocket. Upon arriving in Winter City, Sutton discovered that his assets had dwindled significantly. After recuperating and investing in a luxurious manner, he desperately needed a stable income to ensure a comfortable future. Even with a significant loss of wealth, Earl Sutton Stewart's savings would ensure he could live comfortably for the rest of his life. However, for Earl Sutton Stewart, being deprived of a luxurious lifestyle would be as good as dead. To ensure he could continue living the same happy life he once had, he desperately needed a stable income. If you want to make money, there must be many ways, right? Winter City didn't restrict commerce, and David even encouraged his subjects to engage in commercial activities to a certain extent, so he could collect taxes. That doesn't conflict. It seemed that Sutton, in addition to wanting to do some business, also wanted to receive a salary from David, and he felt he could definitely earn it. David glanced at Sutton Stewart, unsure how to evaluate him. Initially, Earl Stewart had struck him as a playboy who relied on his aristocratic status to get by. Later, after getting to know him for a while, he realized he had real abilities, and that his playboy ways were simply part of his daily life. Earl Stewart's military prowess, defending White Rock City against the Temple's attacks, demonstrated his considerable military prowess, even formidable. He was undoubtedly one of the Tiran Kingdom's top commanders. It was truly a waste of such talent to be left to indulge in debauchery. As for Earl Stewart's connection to the Temple, he had known from the outset that Earl Stewart distrusted the Temple and was even wary of it. The fact that he wasn't directly used as a bomb showed that he was far more resourceful than most Tiran nobles. Others associated with the Temple vanished from this world, even David couldn't bring them back. He underestimated the Temple's resolve and ruthlessness, anticipating that they would destroy all the Tiran dignitaries and pawns he had painstakingly wooed, divided, and absorbed. He couldn't be blamed. No one in his right mind would have imagined such a thing would happen. It was this incident that led David to label the Temple as abnormal. "What position do you want?" as the Duke arranges. "I see." David pondered for a moment and realized there was indeed a position suitable for Sutton Stewart. It was a rather unique position, and no one else could hold it. "How about commander of the Knights of Tilan?" "The Knights of Tilan? You want me to lead the Knights of Tilan?" I'm going to be the Grand Master." Sutton Stewart had expected David to assign him a similar position, something like an advisor. He hadn't expected the young Duke of Glamorgan to actually hand over the Knights of Tiran to him. Was that so generous? "No, the Grand Master is someone else," David had said. "Commander, not Grand Master." There was a difference. And without any pretense of mystery, he simply pointed to Sophia standing next to him and said, "I intend to make Sophia the Grand Master of the Knights of Tiran." Oh, Sutton immediately understood David's intentions. The Tiran Knights were, after all, the Tiran Kingdom's flagship force. The reorganized Tiran Knights also incorporated members of the Royal Guards, resulting in a high degree of loyalty and respect for the Tiran royal family. Even with the miracle of resurrection, the Tiran Knights remained more in awe of the Duke of Glamorgan than in loyalty. Under these circumstances, David was torn over who would become the leader of the Tiran Knights. He doubted David's trust in a leader chosen from within the order, while a leader appointed by David might provoke resistance from within the order. After careful consideration, he concluded that simply appointing Princess Sophia as the titular leader of the Tiran Knights was the best option. Earl Sutton Stewart, the actual commander, would be in charge. As the princess's uncle, the Tiran Knights naturally wouldn't object. Sounds like a good position, Earl Sutton Stewart rejoiced. His income would be secure for the rest of his life, but he didn't forget the more important purpose of his visit. After exchanging a glance with David, the two of them walked a few steps away along the edge of the rooftop, putting some distance between them and the others. "Since you're planning to have Sophia lead the Tiran Knights, shouldn't we finalize some things as soon as possible?" Seeing the hesitation on David's face, Sutton, who had always considered David, Duke of Glamorgan, a lifelong confidant, naturally understood what the Duke was struggling with and immediately offered him a reassurance. "I'm not pushing you, and no one can force you to do something you don't want to do right now. I'm just reminding you that in Winterfell, whether to marry or not, and how many to marry, is entirely up to you." End of this chapter. Thank you very much for reaching the end. Don't forget to like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription, or donation encourages us to continue. Thanks to everyone. See you in the next video.